If you love dramatic stories about mafia bosses and the hidden humanity behind them, please support the channel with a like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps us keep creating.
10 years of silence. One night of reckoning. When Adrian Cross steps onto the stage to announce his new life with supermodel Lila Voss, he has no idea the woman he abandoned is about to destroy him in front of everyone who ever mattered. This is the story of Mara Vale, the invisible wife who became untouchable. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Metropolitan Club glittered like a jewel box that night, every surface reflecting champagne bubbles and diamond necklaces. Adrian Cross stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, adjusting his Tom Ford cufflinks for the third time in 5 minutes. His reflection stared back at him, sharp jawline, perfectly styled dark hair with just enough silver at the temples to suggest wisdom without age. A smile that had graced the covers of Forbes and GQ's simultaneously last spring. He looked like a man who had everything. He felt like a man about to finally get what he deserved. "You're fidgeting," Lila Voss said, gliding up behind him in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. Red silk clung to her frame like it had been painted on. Her blonde hair fell in calculated waves that photographers would call effortless, despite the 3-hour styling session. "It's not like you. I'm not fidgeting, I'm preparing." Adrian turned to face her, his hands finding her waist with practiced ease. "Tonight changes everything." "Tonight confirms everything," Lila corrected, her smile sharp and white. "There's a difference." Through the windows behind them, Manhattan sprawled in all its indifferent glory. Somewhere down there, people were struggling to make rent, fighting over parking spots, living small lives full of small problems. Up here, in this room full of people whose net worth could bail out small countries, those problems didn't exist. Adrian had clawed his way up from those streets. He'd started with nothing but ambition and a wife who believed in him when nobody else would. Now he had everything: the company, the reputation, the connections, the woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. He'd worked hard for this. He'd earned it. The guilt that occasionally flickered in his chest late at night was just the price of success. Everyone had to make sacrifices. Everyone had to leave some things behind to reach the summit. "Mr. Cross," a young assistant appeared at his elbow, tablet in hand. "They're ready for you. 5 minutes." "Thank you, Marcus." Adrian straightened his jacket. "Is everything set?" "Down to the last detail, sir. The presentation will run on the main screen. Your speech is loaded on the teleprompter. The press section is full. We had to turn away 3 outlets. Everyone who matters is here." Everyone who matters. Adrian liked that phrase. It separated the world into 2 categories: people who could help you climb and people who couldn't. He'd gotten very good at identifying which was which. "And my wife?" The word tasted strange in his mouth. Soon it would be past tense. "Has anyone seen Mara?" Marcus glanced at his tablet. "Mrs. Cross arrived 40 minutes ago. She's somewhere in the venue." Somewhere. That sounded about right. Mara had mastered the art of being present without being noticed. For 10 years, she'd perfected invisibility. "Perfect," Adrian said, though he meant it ironically. Lila squeezed his arm. "Stop thinking about her. Tonight is about us, about the future." She was right, of course. Lila was always right about these things. That was one of the many ways she differed from Mara. Lila understood ambition. She understood the game. She didn't waste time on sentiment or nostalgia or those long, wounded silences that Mara had weaponized over the past year. The ballroom hummed with conversation, a sound like expensive machinery running smoothly. Adrian made his way through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting congratulations that felt premature but weren't. Richard Blackwell from Blackwell Industries clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to hurt. "Hell of a night you've got planned, Adrian. Hell of a night." "You don't know the half of it, Richard." "Oh, I think I do." Richard's eyes flicked to Lila, who was holding court near the bar, surrounded by men in tuxedos who were trying very hard to look at her face. "The whole city knows." "Well, everyone except no one," Adrian cut him off. "Everyone who needs to know knows." That was mostly true. The divorce papers had been filed but not yet served. Adrian's lawyers had advised waiting until after tonight. Better optics, they said. Cleaner narrative. First, announce the company's explosive new direction and his engagement to Lila. Then, quietly, handle the dissolution of his marriage to Mara. The press would eat it up either way, but this sequence made him look decisive rather than cruel. Adrian didn't particularly care which one he looked like, but his lawyers were expensive for a reason. Adrian Cross, as I live and breathe. He turned to find Veronica Chen, editor-in-chief of Metropolitan, her dark eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that made politicians nervous. She was one of the most powerful women in media, which meant she was one of the most dangerous people in the room. Veronica, I didn't know you were coming. I wouldn't miss this for anything. She sipped her champagne, studying him over the rim of her glass. Quite the announcement you have planned. News travels fast. News is my business. Secrets are my currency. She tilted her head slightly. Though I have to say, I'm curious about one thing. Adrian felt his smile tighten. Just one? Where's Mara? There it was. The question he'd been waiting for all night, delivered by exactly the person he'd expected to ask it. Around, he said vaguely. You know how she is, not really one for the spotlight. No, Veronica agreed. She never was. I always found that interesting, actually. Most people married to someone like you would at least try to play the game. But Mara, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Mara always seemed content to let you have the glory. That's because she understood her role. Did she? Veronica's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Or did she understand something else entirely? Before Adrian could respond, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the ballroom. Marcus appeared again, nodding. It was time. Adrian made his way to the small stage at the front of the room. A podium stood in a pool of light, and behind it, a massive screen glowed softly. He could feel the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on him. This was the moment he'd been building toward for months, years really, maybe his whole life. He thought briefly of Mara, wherever she was in the crowd. For 10 years, she'd been his shadow, his support, his safety net. She'd worked 2 jobs to put him through business school. She'd entertained clients when he was too junior to matter. She'd smiled through countless dinners where people looked through her like she was made of glass, and he'd appreciated it in his way. But appreciation wasn't love, and loyalty wasn't passion. Lila made him feel alive in ways Mara never had. Lila challenged him, matched him, understood that success required sacrifice. The guilt flickered again, briefly. Then the spotlight hit him, and the guilt disappeared. Good evening, everyone! His voice carried across the ballroom, smooth and confident. Thank you all for being here tonight. I know many of you have been speculating about why I called this gathering, and I promise you won't be disappointed. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. 10 years ago, I started Cross Industries with nothing but an idea and a laptop. Today, we're worth north of $800 million. We've revolutionized digital marketing, changed how brands connect with consumers, and built something that will outlast all of us. He paused for effect, letting the numbers sink in. 800 million sounded impressive. And it was impressive, but it was also a lie. Not about the company's value. That part was real. But the part about starting with nothing, with just an idea and a laptop that was carefully crafted mythology. The truth was messier. The truth involved Mara's inheritance from her grandmother, the $75,000 she'd poured into his business without hesitation. The truth involved her connections through the nonprofit where she'd worked, connections that led to their first 3 major clients. But truth was flexible in rooms like this. Truth was whatever story you told convincingly enough. Tonight, Adrian continued, I want to share 2 announcements that will define the next chapter of Cross Industries and my personal life. He saw Lila near the front, her expression perfectly calibrated, proud but not presumptuous, excited but not desperate. She was a master of presentation. Everything about her was intentional, from the angle of her chin to the way her hand rested lightly on her champagne glass. First, the business news. We've been in talks with Axis Global for the past 6 months, and I'm thrilled to announce that they've agreed to invest $300 million in Cross Industries. This partnership will allow us to expand internationally, triple our workforce, and cement our position as the dominant force in digital brand strategy. The room erupted in applause. Adrian let it wash over him, feeding on the validation, the recognition, the proof that he'd made it. But that's not all, he said, raising his voice slightly to cut through the noise. I believe business is personal. I believe the partnerships we choose in our professional lives reflect who we are as people. and I believe that success means having the courage to make difficult choices. His eyes found Veronica Chen in the crowd. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Which brings me to my second announcement. For the past 10 years, I've been married to Mara Vale. She was there at the beginning, and I'll always be grateful for her support during those early days. He'd used past tense. Several people in the room caught it. He could tell by the slight shift in their posture, the way conversations died mid-sentence. But people grow. Paths diverge. And sometimes the person who was right for one chapter isn't right for the next. He extended his hand toward the audience. Lila, would you join me? Lila moved through the crowd like light through water, effortless and inevitable. She stepped onto the stage, and the difference between her and Mara had never been more obvious. Lila belonged here. Lila was made for moments like this. I'm proud to announce that Lila Voss has agreed to be my wife, Adrian said, slipping his arm around her waist. And more than that, she's joining Cross Industries as our new chief brand officer. Her vision, her creativity, her understanding of what makes brands transcend mere products. This is exactly what we need to take the company to the next level. More applause, though this time it felt slightly uncertain. People were doing the math, figuring out the timeline. Some of them probably knew about Lila before tonight. Others were just now connecting the dots. Adrian didn't care. Let them gossip. Let them judge. By tomorrow, he'd be too successful for their opinions to matter. Some of you may be wondering about the timing, he acknowledged, deciding to address it head-on. Why announce a professional partnership and a personal one simultaneously? The answer is simple. I don't believe in compartmentalizing success. I don't believe in pretending our personal lives don't impact our professional ones. I believe in radical honesty, in transparency, in living authentically. The irony of saying this while lying about almost everything wasn't lost on him, but irony was another luxury afforded to the successful. So yes, my marriage to Mara is ending. Yes, I'm beginning a new chapter with Lila. And yes, this might make some people uncomfortable. But discomfort is the price of growth. Stagnation is the real failure. And I refuse to let loyalty to the past prevent me from building the future. He'd practiced this speech a dozen times, refining it with Lila's help until every word landed exactly right. It acknowledged the situation without apologizing for it. It positioned him as brave rather than callous. It made evolution sound noble. Now, Adrian said, his smile widening, I know that's a lot to process. But before we continue celebrating, I want to give you all a glimpse of what's coming next. If you'll direct your attention to the screen, the lights dimmed further. The massive screen behind him flickered to life, showing a sleek presentation that Lila had designed herself. Images of global expansion, new offices in London and Singapore, projections of revenue growth that made 800 million look quaint. Adrian stepped aside, letting the visuals do their work. This was the moment he'd choreographed so carefully, the moment when everyone would be too dazzled by the future to ask uncomfortable questions about the past. But something was wrong. The screen flickered. The presentation froze on a slide showing the Cross Industries logo. Then the image changed. Adrian's stomach dropped. On the screen, in stark white text against a black background, a single question appeared. Who really built Cross Industries? The room went silent. Adrian looked at Marcus, who was frantically typing on his tablet, his face pale. The screen changed again, and this time it showed a document. Even from the stage, Adrian recognized it. His original business plan, the one he'd written in Mara's tiny apartment while she worked night shifts at the hospital. But this version had annotations, comments in the margins, suggestions in a handwriting he knew as well as his own. Mara's handwriting. The screen scrolled slowly, deliberately, showing page after page of her contributions. Ideas she'd added, strategies she'd developed, entire sections she'd written when he'd been too overwhelmed to continue. Adrian's mouth went dry. Marcus, he hissed, stepping away from the microphone. Fix this, now. I'm trying, sir. Someone's overridden the system. I can't. The screen changed again. This time it showed financial records, bank statements. Mara's name next to a transfer for $75,000, labeled Cross Industries Startup Capital. Then more transfers. Smaller ones, regular ones. Monthly deposits from Mara's paycheck into the business account, even after Cross Industries started turning a profit. Turn it off, Adrian said. his voice tight. I can't. Marcus was sweating now. It's on a loop. Someone pre-programmed this. I need to physically disconnect the... But it was too late. The room had seen. 300 of the most influential people in New York had just watched evidence that contradicted everything Adrian had said, everything he'd built his reputation on. The screen went black for a moment. Then new text appeared. Every empire has a foundation. Most people just don't look underneath. The lights came back up slowly. Adrian stood on the stage, Lila frozen beside him, both of them caught in a moment that had spiraled completely out of his control. And that's when he saw her. Mara. She was standing near the back of the ballroom, but somehow she commanded attention anyway. She wasn't wearing some dramatic designer gown. Her dress was simple, elegant, dark gray silk that looked expensive in a quiet way. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, showing cheekbones he'd somehow never noticed before. But it was her expression that stopped him cold. She wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. She wasn't any of the things he'd expected if this moment ever came. She looked calm, completely, terrifyingly calm. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Adrian felt something shift in his chest. Some recognition he couldn't quite name. For 10 years, he'd looked at Mara and seen what he expected to see. The supportive wife, the helpful partner, the woman content to fade into the background. Now looking at her, he realized he'd never actually seen her at all. Veronica Chen was suddenly at the foot of the stage, her phone out, recording. Other phones appeared throughout the room, a constellation of glowing screens capturing every second. Well, Veronica said, her voice carrying in the silence, this is unexpected. Adrian's mind raced. He needed to salvage this, needed to spin it, control it, turn it into something other than the disaster it was becoming. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, forcing his voice to stay steady, it appears someone has decided to play a prank. A malicious, inappropriate... It's not a prank, Adrian. The voice came from the back of the room. Not Mara's voice. Deeper. Male. With an accent Adrian couldn't place. A man stepped into view wearing a suit that made everyone else's look cheap by comparison. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of presence that suggested violence was always an option, just not his first choice. Who the hell are you? Adrian demanded. The man smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. I'm just someone who believes in accurate accounting, he said. And your books, Mr. Cross, have been wrong for a very long time. More people were appearing now, emerging from the crowd like they'd been waiting for a cue. Adrian recognized some of them, board members of Cross Industries, senior executives, people who were supposed to be loyal to him. What is this? Lila whispered, gripping his arm. Adrian, what's happening? He didn't know. That was the terrifying part. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian Cross had no idea what was happening. Marcus appeared at his elbow again, his tablet shaking in his hands. Sir, I'm getting notifications, company email, company social media. Someone's posting, they're posting everything. The financial records, board meeting minutes, internal emails about the Axis deal. Sir, they're posting emails you sent about Mrs. Cross, about how to time the divorce announcement for maximum PR benefit. They're posting texts between you and Miss Voss from 8 months ago before you'd even filed. Adrian snatched the tablet from him. His vision blurred as he scrolled through the notifications. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Every dirty little secret he'd carefully buried was being exposed in real time, uploaded to the internet for the world to dissect. On the screen behind him, a new image appeared. It was a photograph taken through a window. Adrian and Lila at dinner, his hand on her thigh, her head thrown back in laughter. The date stamp read 7 months before he told Mara he wanted a divorce. Oh no, Lila breathed. Oh no, oh no, oh no. The room was no longer silent. Conversations erupted everywhere, angry and excited and hungry. This was scandal on a scale most of these people only read about. Now they were watching it unfold in real time. Adrian looked back at Mara. She hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. She just stood there, watching him fall apart with those dark eyes that had once looked at him like he hung the moon. He'd thought she was weak, thought she was simple, thought she was someone he could leave behind without consequences. He'd been wrong about everything. Someone's phone rang, then another. People started excusing themselves, stepping into the hallway to make calls. Adrian watched his carefully constructed night dissolve into chaos, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Richard Blackwell was making his way to the exit, not even trying to hide his disgust. The CEO of Axis Global was on his phone, his expression grim. Adrian's own board members were clustering together, talking in low, urgent voices. "Adrian," Lila said, and he'd never heard her voice sound like that before. Thin, scared, young. "I need to go. I need to leave. I can't be here for this." "Don't you dare!" He grabbed her wrist, harder than he meant to. "Don't you dare leave me!" "You're hurting me," she said quietly. He let go, watched her step back, then turn and walk away, her red dress cutting through the crowd like a wound. The man with the silver hair was climbing onto the stage now, moving with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there. Adrian wanted to stop him, wanted to call security, wanted to do something. But he couldn't move, couldn't think, could only watch as his world collapsed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the man said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "I apologize for the disruption, but I think it's time we had an honest conversation about Cross Industries. About where it came from, about who really built it, about who actually owns it." "You can't do this," Adrian found his voice finally. "This is my company, mine." "Is it?" The man's smile widened. "I think you'll find the paperwork tells a different story. And speaking of paperwork," he gestured towards the entrance. The grand doors opened and two people walked in, a man and a woman, both carrying briefcases, both radiating the particular confidence of lawyers who knew they held winning hands. "These are representatives from Sterling and Bach," the silver-haired man explained. "Perhaps you've heard of them. Manhattan's premier corporate law firm? They have some interesting information about the actual ownership structure of Cross Industries, information that I think will surprise you." "This is insane," Adrian said, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. "You can't just walk in here and—" "Can I?" The man stepped closer. "Mr. Cross, you've spent 10 years taking credit for work you didn't do, profiting from investments you didn't make, building a reputation on foundations someone else laid. Tonight, the bill comes due." The female lawyer was setting up a laptop now, projecting new images onto the screen. Corporate documents, ownership papers, articles of incorporation, and there, on every single one, was Mara's signature. Not as a witness, not as a spouse, as the primary shareholder. The room spun. Adrian gripped the podium to steady himself. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I own 60% of Cross Industries. You own 30%, the lawyer corrected, her voice crisp and professional. "You've always owned 30%. The rest was distributed among various holding companies and trusts. Companies and trusts that if you'd bothered to read the paperwork you signed, you would have realized were all controlled by one person." She turned her laptop screen toward the audience, showing a corporate family tree that led, inevitably, to a single name at the top. Mara Vale. "This is fraud," Adrian said desperately. "This is identity theft. This is extremely well-documented business practice," the lawyer interrupted. "Every document has been filed correctly, every signature notarized, every transfer recorded. You signed these papers yourself, Mr. Cross. I have your initials on 93 separate pages." "I didn't know what I was signing. That's not a legal defense. That's just poor due diligence." The room was watching him now with a mixture of pity and schadenfreude. These people who'd been toasting him 30 minutes ago were now witnessing his humiliation. And Mara still hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. The evidence was speaking for her. Adrian's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. Text messages were flooding in. His financial advisor, his publicist, his agent, all of them saying variations of the same thing. "We need to talk immediately." Another text came through, this one from his lawyer. "Don't say anything else. Don't move. I'm on my way." Too late for that. Adrian had already said too much, done too much, revealed too much. He looked at the audience, trying to find even one sympathetic face, but they'd already moved on from sympathy. They were waiting for the next revelation, the next twist in a story that had gone from boring corporate announcement to the scandal of the season. The screen changed again. This time it showed an email from Adrian to Lila, dated 9 months ago. "Mara still thinks I'm working late. God, she's so trusting, it's almost sad. Once the Axis deal closes, I'll have enough security to finally leave. Can you imagine her face when she realizes I'm gone? Lila's response was there too. Don't be cruel, baby. Just be quick. Rip off the Band-Aid. Adrian felt bile rise in his throat. He'd written that email drunk after a particularly good day. He'd forgotten about it completely. But someone had remembered. Someone had been watching, collecting, documenting everything. You see, the silver-haired man continued, addressing the room now. Mr. Cross believed he was building something alone. But every empire requires foundation. Every success story has chapters we don't talk about. Tonight, we're reading those missing chapters. Who are you? Adrian asked again, desperate now. What do you want? Me? I'm nobody. I'm just the messenger. He gestured toward Mara. She's the one you should be asking. All eyes turned to Mara. She stepped forward, moving through the crowd with a grace Adrian had never noticed before. People parted for her automatically. When she reached the stage, she didn't climb the steps. The silver-haired man simply extended his hand and helped her up, treating her with a deference that spoke of respect earned, not given. Standing next to Adrian now, Mara finally looked at him directly. Hello, Adrian, she said quietly. Her voice was different, or maybe it wasn't different at all. Maybe he'd just never really listened before. Mara, whatever you think you're doing, I'm not doing anything, she interrupted, and even her interruption was calm, measured. I'm just correcting the record, making sure everyone knows the truth. The truth? Adrian laughed, and it sounded desperate even to himself. The truth is, you're angry I'm leaving you, so you're trying to destroy me. I'm not trying to destroy you, Adrian. I'm trying to save what I built. She turned to address the room. 10 years ago, I met a man with big dreams and no capital. I believed in those dreams. I invested my grandmother's inheritance. I made connections. I helped write business plans. I sat through meetings while he presented ideas we'd developed together as his own. And I did it gladly, because I loved him. The room was absolutely silent now. But love isn't enough to build something that lasts, Mara continued. You also need protection, insurance. My grandmother taught me that. She built her own business in the 1960s, when women weren't supposed to build anything. She taught me to always read the fine print, to always protect myself, to never assume someone else will look out for my interests. She pulled a folder from somewhere. Adrian hadn't even noticed she was carrying one, and opened it. So when Adrian asked me to invest in Cross Industries, I did, but I also made sure my investment was protected. Every time the company needed capital, I provided it, and every time I made sure the paperwork reflected my contribution. She looked at Adrian. You never read those papers. You just signed where your lawyer told you to sign. My lawyer worked for me. Your lawyer worked for the company, Mara corrected gently. The company I controlled. He disclosed that to you multiple times. You just never asked for clarification. Adrian's mind raced through years of signatures, papers he'd signed while distracted, while on phone calls, while thinking about other things. He'd trusted his legal team, trusted the process, trusted that everyone was working in his interest. This is still fraud, he said weakly. No, the female lawyer interjected. This is what happens when you don't read what you sign. Every document is legal. Every transfer was proper. Mrs. Vale owns 70% of Cross Industries. She always has. The implications crashed over Adrian like waves. 70%. That meant Mara controlled the company, controlled the board, controlled everything. The Axis deal, he said suddenly. I negotiated that. I spent 6 months. The Axis deal is dead, Mara said simply. I called Jonathan Axis 2 hours ago and explained that Cross Industries wouldn't be moving forward with the investment. He understood. You can't do that. I can. I did. She looked at him with something that might have been pity. Adrian, you never understood how business actually works. You thought it was about charisma, about confidence, about telling the right story, and those things matter, but they're not enough. You also need the fundamentals, the ownership, the control, the power. I have power, Adrian said desperately. I built this company. Everyone knows my name. I'm the face of... You're the face of nothing now, Mara interrupted, and for the first time there was emotion in her voice. Not anger exactly, something colder. In about 6 hours, when the markets open, a press release will go out. It will announce my majority ownership of Cross Industries. It will thank you for your contributions. It will wish you well in your future endeavors. And it will introduce the new CEO. New CEO. Adrian felt dizzy. You can't fire me. I'm You're terminated, effective immediately, the silver-haired man said. He pulled out his own folder, handing it to Adrian. Severance package is generous considering 3 months pay, health insurance through the end of the year, positive reference letters. But you're done. Adrian opened the folder with shaking hands. The letterhead was Cross Industries. The signature at the bottom was Mara's. This isn't legal, he said, but he was grasping now, and everyone knew it. It's completely legal, the lawyer confirmed. The board approved it unanimously 2 hours ago. The board? Adrian looked around frantically. James? Richard? You can't. But Richard Blackwell was already leaving. James Morrison wouldn't meet his eyes. The board members he'd thought were his allies were nowhere to be seen. They work for the company, Mara explained patiently. Not for you. Once I explained the situation, they understood where their loyalties should lie. The enormity of it hit Adrian all at once. This wasn't improvised. This wasn't revenge. This was a plan executed with precision over months, maybe years. While he'd been plotting his grand announcement, Mara had been building her coup. You can't do this to me, he said, and hated how his voice broke. Everything I am, everything I've built, everything you are because I allowed it, Mara said quietly. And now I'm taking it back. She turned to the audience, and when she spoke, her voice carried authority Adrian had never heard from her before. Cross Industries will continue to thrive. We'll honor our commitments to clients. We'll maintain our reputation for excellence. The only thing that's changing is the leadership. The rest remains the same. Someone started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause, not for Adrian, but for Mara, his wife. His invisible, forgettable, easily dismissed wife. Adrian stumbled backward, off the stage, into the crowd that no longer wanted him. People avoided his eyes. Conversations died when he approached. He'd become toxic in the span of 30 minutes. His phone buzzed again. Lila finally, I'm sorry, I can't be part of this. Goodbye. He tried to call her, but she'd already blocked his number. Marcus found him near the bar, looking pale and young. Sir, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. It's fine, Marcus. Adrian's voice sounded hollow. None of this is your fault. What do you want me to do? Nothing. There's nothing to do. Adrian looked back at the stage where Mara was now talking to Veronica Chen, both women smiling. It's over. And it was. Adrian could feel it the way you feel a bone break. His career, his reputation, his future, all of it was done. Mara hadn't just exposed him. She'd systematically dismantled everything he'd built on stolen ground. He made his way to the exit, moving through the crowd like a ghost. Nobody stopped him. Nobody tried to console him. He'd spent 10 years cultivating these relationships, and they'd evaporated in an instant. At the door, he looked back one final time. Mara was still on the stage, surrounded by people who wanted to talk to her, congratulate her, align themselves with the new power in the room. She caught his eye across the distance, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something sad in her expression. Then she looked away, turning her attention to the next person seeking her favor. Adrian stepped out into the New York night. Behind him, the party continued without him. Ahead, the city stretched out in all its indifferent glory. Somewhere down there, people were living their small lives, dealing with their small problems, unaware that Adrian Cross had just become one of them. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. You asked who I was. My name is Victor Kane. I'm Mrs. Vale's associate. We'll be in touch regarding the terms of your exit. I suggest you cooperate. I really do suggest it. Adrian deleted the text. Then he turned off his phone entirely. The Metropolitan Club glittered behind him, full of light and laughter, and people who'd already forgotten he existed. Adrian Cross walked down the steps alone, heading toward a future that held nothing he recognized. He'd thought he was shedding his past tonight. Instead, his past had shed him. The morning after destroyed men didn't come gently. Adrian woke on the leather couch in what used to be his office at Cross Industries, his neck cramped, his mouth tasting like something had died in it. Sunlight cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows with aggressive cheerfulness, and for a confused moment he thought last night had been a nightmare. Then he saw the cardboard box on his desk. Someone had already packed his personal items. The framed magazine covers featuring his face, The awards with his name engraved in brass. The crystal paperweight Lila had given him for their 6-month anniversary. Everything that proved he'd mattered, reduced to objects that fit in a box he could carry with 2 hands. His phone, he'd turned it back on around 3 in the morning, unable to stand the silence, showed 217 missed calls. He didn't need to check the voicemails to know what they'd say. The press wanting comments, former friends wanting distance, Lila wanting nothing at all. The door opened without a knock. Victor Kane walked in like he owned the place, which, Adrian supposed darkly, he probably did by proxy. "Good morning, Mr. Cross. I trust you slept well. What are you doing here?" Adrian's voice came out rough. He hadn't had water in hours. "Making sure you understand the terms of your departure?" Victor set a slim briefcase on the desk, popping it open with practiced efficiency. "Your severance package requires certain conditions. I'm here to ensure you understand them." "I'm not signing anything else. That's unfortunate because without your signature, the severance package disappears, along with your health insurance, your stock options, your exit bonus." Victor pulled out a document, sliding it across the desk. "But if you cooperate, you walk away with enough money to start over, somewhere else, preferably somewhere quiet." Adrian picked up the document, forcing his eyes to focus through the headache. It was a non-disclosure agreement, a non-compete clause, a non-disparagement agreement. Basically, a contract that said he couldn't talk about cross industries, couldn't work in digital marketing, and couldn't say anything negative about Mara or the company for the next 5 years. "This is insane." "This is generous," Victor corrected. "Mrs. Vale could have left you with nothing, could have prosecuted you for misrepresentation, for fraud, for a dozen other things that would have landed you in actual legal trouble. Instead, she's offering you a soft landing. I'd take it if I were you." "Fraud? I didn't commit fraud. I built that company. You built it with someone else's money while pretending it was yours. You lied to investors about ownership structure. You made representations in board meetings that were materially false." Victor's voice never rose, but it didn't need to. "Mrs. Vale has documentation of every misstatement you made over the past 10 years. She could bury you. She's choosing not to. Don't mistake mercy for weakness." Adrian wanted to throw the document back in his face, wanted to tell Victor to go to hell, wanted to walk out with his middle finger raised high. But he'd looked at his bank account at 4 in the morning, the personal account that wasn't tied to the company. $43,000. That was what a decade of success had left him with personally, because everything else had been reinvested, tied up in stock options that Mara now controlled, locked in accounts that required board approval to access. Without the severance, he had barely enough to last 6 months, maybe 3 if he kept the apartment Lila had picked out, the apartment he'd signed a 2-year lease on 4 months ago. "Where's Mara?" Adrian asked, hating how defeated he sounded. "Mrs. Vale is meeting with the executive team, reassuring them that the transition will be smooth, making personnel decisions." Victor checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Adrian's car. "She's very busy, building the future and all that." The casual cruelty of it stung worse than anything else. Mara had moved on before Adrian had even finished falling. While he was sleeping on his office couch, she was already running the empire she'd taken from him. "I want to talk to her." "That's not possible. I deserve an explanation." "You deserve nothing," Victor said, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice. "You spent 10 years taking credit for her work. You planned to leave her publicly, humiliate her in front of everyone who matters, all so you could play house with a woman half your age. You wanted to erase her contribution to the company she built. So no, Mr. Cross, you don't deserve an explanation. You deserve exactly what you're getting." Adrian's hand shook as he picked up the pen. He wanted to fight, wanted to refuse, wanted to do something other than surrender. But he was so tired. And Victor was right. Fighting would only make everything worse. He signed on the 3 places marked with yellow tabs. His signature looked shaky, nothing like the bold scrawl that used to close deals worth millions. "Excellent choice." Victor collected the documents, sliding them back into his briefcase. "You have until 5 p.m. to clear out your personal belongings. Security will escort you from the building. I'd recommend leaving sooner rather than later. The staff is uncomfortable with your presence." "I worked with these people for years." And they all knew you were lying about Mrs. Vale's contributions. Most of them have known for years. Victor paused at the door. You're not the victim here, Mr. Cross. You're just the only one who believed your own story. After he left, Adrian sat in the silence of his former office. Through the glass walls, he could see people moving through the workspace. People he'd hired, mentored, promoted. None of them looked in his direction. They moved around his office like it was already empty. His phone buzzed, a text from his publicist, Diane Chen. We need to talk about damage control. Call me. Then another from his lawyer, Robert Sterling. Don't say anything to anyone. Press, friends, nobody. We're exploring options. And finally, one from his mother in Cleveland. Saw the news. Are you okay? Call me when you can. Adrian deleted all three without responding. He started packing the box, but halfway through he stopped. What was the point? These weren't achievements anymore. They were evidence of a lie he'd told so well he'd believed it himself. The magazine cover from Forbes. The headline read, "The Man Who Revolutionized Digital Marketing." But the revolution had been Mara's idea, proposed over dinner one night when he was complaining about client retention. She'd sketched it out on a napkin while he ate pasta. He'd presented it to the board the next week as his own innovation, the Inklaw Magazine Award for Entrepreneur of the Year. He'd given an acceptance speech about vision and risk-taking. Never mentioned that Mara had covered the company's payroll with her own credit card during that first lean year when clients were slow to pay. The photograph of him shaking hands with the mayor at some charity gala. Mara had organized the whole event, had spent weeks coordinating with nonprofits and vendors. She'd stood off to the side during the photo op, smiling, invisible. Adrian left the box on the desk and walked out. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. When the doors opened on the ground floor, two security guards were waiting. Tony and Marcus, both guys Adrian had joked around with hundreds of times, both guys who'd called him boss with genuine respect. Now they wouldn't meet his eyes. Mr. Cross, Tony said quietly, we need to escort you out. I know the way. Company policy, sir. So they walked him through the lobby he'd crossed every morning for 10 years, past the reception desk where Jenny had greeted him with coffee exactly how he liked it, past the walls decorated with campaign work that Mara had art directed while he took calls from reporters, and finally through the glass doors into the morning chaos of Manhattan. The guard stopped at the threshold. Adrian turned back, looking at the building that had been his whole world. For what it's worth, Tony said, so quietly Adrian almost missed it. I'm sorry. Don't be. I earned this. The walk to his apartment took 45 minutes because he couldn't stand the thought of getting in a cab and making small talk with a driver who might recognize him. The streets were full of people rushing to jobs that still wanted them, and Adrian felt invisible in a way he'd never experienced before. Yesterday he'd been someone. Today, he was just another guy in a wrinkled suit, walking nowhere important. His apartment building doorman, Robert, had always been friendly, had always asked about work, always commented on Adrian's success with genuine warmth. Now Robert's expression was careful, neutral. Morning, Mr. Cross. Morning, Robert. That was all. No conversation about the weather or the Knicks or the construction happening on 3rd Avenue. Just a polite acknowledgement and then eyes forward, pretending Adrian had already passed. The apartment felt wrong. Lila's taste was everywhere. The mid-century modern furniture she'd insisted on, the abstract art she'd picked out during a weekend in the Hamptons, the custom bookshelves filled with books chosen for their spine colors rather than their content. Adrian had paid for all of it, but none of it was his. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered anyway, because what did he have to lose? Mr. Cross, this is Jennifer Park from the Times. I was hoping to get a comment on last night's events. He hung up. It rang again immediately. Different number. Adrian Cross, this is TMZ. We're running a story about your relationship with Lila Voss, and we wanted to give you a chance to... He hung up again, the third time it rang. He answered without checking. Whatever you're selling, I don't want it. Adrian. The voice was familiar, warm, completely unexpected. It's me. Can we talk? Mara. Adrian sat down on the couch that cost $8,000 and felt like sitting on a museum display. I don't think that's allowed. Pretty sure your attack dog made it clear I'm supposed to stay away from you. Victor is protective, and he's not an attack dog. He's a friend. Friend. Adrian laughed bitterly. Since when do you have friends who look like they murder people for fun? Since I stopped pretending I was someone I wasn't. There was a pause. Can we meet? Just for an hour. There are things I need to say. Your lawyers said I shouldn't talk to you. I'm not asking as the owner of Cross Industries. I'm asking as your wife. Technically still your wife for another 72 hours. Something in her voice made Adrian close his eyes. Where? The coffee shop on Amsterdam and 67th, the one where you proposed. That's cruel, Mara. No, she said quietly. What you did to me was cruel. This is just honest. She hung up before he could respond. Adrian stood in his apartment looking at his reflection in the window. He looked older than he had yesterday. Smaller somehow. The man in the glass wasn't the confident CEO who'd walked into the Metropolitan Club 20 hours ago. He was just someone who'd lost everything and didn't know how to process it. He went anyway. The coffee shop was crowded with the lunch rush. NYU students on laptops, freelancers pretending to work, tourists trying to figure out the subway map. Adrian spotted Mara in the back corner, the same table where he'd proposed 7 years ago. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger than she had last night, more like the woman he'd married. But her eyes were different. They'd always been soft when she looked at him, now they were just careful. Hi, she said when he sat down. Hi. A waitress appeared. Adrian ordered black coffee because his stomach couldn't handle anything else. Mara already had tea, something herbal that smelled like flowers. How are you? Mara asked. How do you think I am? I think you're angry, humiliated, probably plotting some kind of revenge. I'm too tired to plot anything. Adrian wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, even though it was too hot to hold. The pain felt appropriate. You destroyed me. I took back what was mine. It wasn't just yours. I worked for that company. You did, Mara agreed. You worked hard. You're talented, Adrian, charismatic. People like you, they want to follow you. None of that is a lie. Then why? Because you forgot where you came from, because you started believing the story you told everyone else. She leaned forward slightly. Do you remember what you said to me 3 months ago when you told me you wanted a divorce? Adrian did remember. He'd practiced the speech in his head for weeks, trying to find the right words. I said we'd grown apart. You said I was holding you back. You said you needed someone who understood ambition, who could match your energy. You said I was too comfortable being ordinary. Mara's voice didn't waver. You said you'd built something extraordinary, and you deserved an extraordinary partner. I was trying to be kind. You were trying to convince yourself you weren't abandoning someone who loved you, that you were making a smart business decision. She sipped her tea. The problem is, you believed it. You actually believed you'd built Cross Industries alone, that my contributions were negligible, that I was just along for the ride. Adrian wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Because she was right. He had believed it. Somewhere along the way, he'd rewritten history in his head until Mara became a footnote in his own success story. I didn't mean to... I know you didn't. That's what made it worse. Mara set down her cup carefully. If you'd been cruel on purpose, I could have hated you. But you genuinely didn't see what you were doing. You looked at me every day and saw someone small, someone forgettable, someone who didn't matter. That's not true. Then why didn't you read the ownership documents? In 10 years, you never once asked who actually owned Cross Industries. You just assumed it was you. Adrian couldn't answer that, because she was right again. He'd signed papers his lawyers put in front of him, trusting that everyone was working in his interest. It had never occurred to him that the quiet woman who made him breakfast might be the one actually in control. Your grandmother, he said finally, she taught you this. She taught me to protect myself, to never depend on someone else's generosity or memory or sense of fairness, to build my own foundation. Mara's expression softened slightly. She loved my grandfather, but she never forgot that love isn't a legal contract, that feelings change, that people leave. So you've been planning this for 10 years? Just waiting for me to screw up? No. For 10 years, I hoped I was wrong about you, hoped you'd prove to be different than the man I was afraid you'd become. She looked out the window at the street, at people rushing past with their own problems. But then you started staying late at the office, started mentioning Lila's name too often, started looking at me like I was furniture you'd gotten tired of. I didn't. You did, Adrian. And I knew. Women always know. We just pretend we don't because confronting it means blowing up our lives. She turned back to him. So I started preparing, making sure the documentation was clear, making sure my ownership was unassailable, making sure that when you finally left, you wouldn't take my company with you. Your company, Adrian repeated. It was never our company to you. It stopped being our company when you started planning to replace me. Mara's voice hardened. You wanted to stand on that stage with Lila, announce your engagement, take credit for everything we built together, and leave me with nothing. What was I supposed to do? Just accept it, smile, and fade away quietly? You could have talked to me. I tried. 3 years ago, when you started pulling away, I asked if we could go to counseling. You said you were too busy. 2 years ago, I suggested we take a vacation, just us, no phones, try to reconnect. You said the company needed you. Last year, I asked point blank if you still loved me. She paused. Do you remember what you said? Adrian didn't want to remember, but the memory came anyway, sharp and clear. They'd been in bed, the lights off, both of them staring at the ceiling. He'd said, I love the life we've built. Not, I love you. Just the life, the comfortable arrangement, the convenient partnership. I didn't know what else to say, he admitted. You could have said the truth, that you'd fallen out of love with me, that you wanted something different. That would have hurt, but at least it would have been honest. Would you have let me go if I'd been honest? Mara considered this for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe. But you didn't give me that choice. You made decisions behind my back. You planned your exit strategy like I was a business problem to solve. So this is revenge. This is justice, Mara corrected. There's a difference. Adrian's coffee had gone cold. He pushed it away. What happens now? Now you sign the non-compete, take the severance, and start over somewhere else, preferably in a different industry. And if I fight, then Victor stops being nice, and you discover that I have friends you never knew about. Friends who are very good at making problems disappear. She said it casually, like she was discussing the weather. I'd prefer not to go that route. Despite everything, I did love you once. I'd like to remember that without additional complications. Victor isn't just a lawyer, is he? Victor is whatever he needs to be. Mara gathered her purse, preparing to leave. He's also someone who's been in my life a lot longer than you have. What does that mean? It means you never asked about my life before we met. You knew I grew up in Boston, that my grandmother raised me after my parents died, that I worked at a nonprofit before Cross Industries. But you never asked for details. Never wondered why a woman with a sociology degree from a state school had $75,000 to invest in a startup. Never questioned where I learned about corporate structure or contract law. Adrian felt cold spread through his chest. Who are you? I'm exactly who I always was. You just never bothered to look closely. Mara stood, leaving a 20 on the table for her tea. My grandmother didn't just run a business, Adrian. She ran an empire. Import-export, mostly legal, occasionally not. When she died, she left me more than money. She left me connections, protection, power. You're saying your grandmother was a criminal? I'm saying my grandmother was a businesswoman who understood that rules are written by people with power to keep people without power in their place. She played the game better than most men ever could. Mara looked down at him, and Adrian saw something in her expression he'd never noticed before. Something hard and ancient and absolutely certain. And she taught me to play it too. So what, you're some kind of mob princess? That's insane. I'm a woman who protected her interests, that's all. She pulled on her coat. The divorce papers will be finalized Friday. You'll receive your copy via courier. Don't contest it. Don't drag this out. Just sign and move on. And then what? You ride off into the sunset with your mysterious protector? Mara smiled, and it was sad and knowing and completely without warmth. Something like that. She walked away, weaving through the coffee shop crowd with practiced ease. Adrian watched her go, this woman he'd shared a bed with for 10 years, and realized he'd never known her at all. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The box from your office will be delivered to your apartment by 6 p.m. Don't come back to the building. Adrian looked around the coffee shop, suddenly paranoid. Was Victor here? Watching? How much surveillance had Mara put on him? Another text. Stop looking around. I'm not there. But I'm always watching. Remember that. V. Adrian put his phone face down on the table. His hands were shaking. A woman at the next table was watching him, her expression curious. It took him a moment to recognize her. Jessica something, a reporter for Business Insider. She'd interviewed him 6 months ago for a profile that had made him sound like a visionary. She smiled apologetically and looked away, but Adrian saw her pull out her phone, saw her fingers moving quickly, typing, probably texting her editor, probably saying, "You won't believe who I just saw looking like complete hell at a coffee shop on the Upper West Side." He left without finishing his coffee. The walk back to his apartment felt longer than the walk there. His phone kept buzzing, more calls from reporters, more texts from former colleagues suddenly remembering they had his number, more notifications that his Wikipedia page was being edited in real time to reflect his spectacular fall. By the time he reached his building, Adrian's phone had died. He hadn't charged it since yesterday. Another small failure in a day full of them. Robert the doorman handed him a package without comment. Plain brown box, no return address. Adrian carried it upstairs, his arms already tired. Inside his apartment, he opened the package carefully, half expecting something dramatic. Legal threats, evidence of other crimes, something. Instead, he found a USB drive and a handwritten note. The note was in Mara's handwriting. "You deserve to know the whole truth. Watch this when you're ready. It won't make you feel better, but at least you'll understand." Adrian held the USB drive like it might bite him. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to refuse whatever revelation Mara had prepared. But curiosity won. He plugged it into his laptop. The file was a video, time-stamped from 6 months ago. A board meeting he vaguely remembered, routine enough that he'd spent half of it checking his phone under the table. But this recording showed something he hadn't seen. After the meeting officially ended, after Adrian had left to take a call from Lila, the board had kept talking. Mara had stayed in the room. Now that Adrian's gone, James Morrison said in the video, his tone completely different from the deferential way he usually spoke. "Can we talk about the real numbers?" "The real numbers show we're in trouble," another board member said. "The Axis deal is the only thing keeping us afloat." "The Axis deal is smoke and mirrors," Mara's voice said, and Adrian watched his wife, his quiet, forgettable wife, command the room with effortless authority. "Jonathan Axis is a predator. He's offering $300 million because he knows we're desperate. But read the fine print of his term sheet. He gets 40% equity, 3 board seats, and veto power over major decisions. Within a year, he'll manufacture a crisis, force us to take more money at a worse valuation, and end up owning this company outright." Ismoki. "So what do we do?" James asked. "We don't take his money. We restructure. I've been building something separate, something Adrian doesn't know about. A holding company that owns our most valuable assets. We transfer the profitable divisions there, leave the struggling ones in cross industries, and when Axis realizes he's buying a gutted shell, we'll already have built something better." Adrian's stomach dropped. This conversation had happened 6 months ago. While he was planning his future with Lila, Mara had been planning to hollow out his company. The video continued. Strategic discussions, financial projections, plans to slowly strip cross-industries of everything valuable, while Adrian smiled for cameras and gave interviews about his vision for the future. And the board had gone along with it. Every single person he'd trusted had chosen Mara over him. The video ended. A second file appeared in the folder labeled Evidence. Adrian opened it, already knowing it would be bad. It was worse. Years of documentation. Every time Adrian had claimed credit for Mara's ideas in meetings. Every time he'd presented her work as his own. Every time he'd dismissed her contributions or suggested she was just providing wifely support rather than actual business strategy. And worse than that, recordings of him with Lila. Conversations Adrian didn't remember having. Hotel rooms he'd forgotten. Lies he'd told Mara while Lila listened on speakerphone, both of them laughing at how easily he got away with it. He'd thought he was being clever, thought he was playing the game well, but Mara had been recording everything, building a case, waiting for the right moment to use it. Adrian closed the laptop and sat in the expensive silence of his expensive apartment, understanding finally that he'd never been in control of anything. His phone, he'd plugged it in to charge, buzzed back to life with a flood of notifications. One caught his eye. An email from Lila, sent an hour ago. "Adrian, I'm sorry for how this ended. You have to understand, I didn't know about Mara's ownership. I thought you were who you said you were. I thought we were building something real. But I can't be associated with this scandal. My career is just starting, and your situation is toxic. I hope you understand. Please don't contact me again. My lawyers will reach out if necessary. L. Adrian laughed, and it sounded broken even to himself. Lila had jumped ship with impressive speed. By this time tomorrow, she'd probably be photographed with some other rising star, her arm around someone new, her smile just as bright as it had been when she'd looked at him. Another email, this one from his mother. Adrian, I don't know what's happening, but I'm worried. Please call me. I don't care what you did. You're still my son. Mom. He couldn't call her, couldn't explain that he'd lost everything because he'd been too arrogant to see the trap closing around him. Couldn't admit that the woman he'd dismissed as ordinary had played him like a fiddle for 10 years. A third email from an address he didn't recognize. Mr. Cross, I represent several media outlets interested in your story. There's significant money available for an exclusive interview. 6 figures, possibly more if you're willing to discuss intimate details of your marriage and relationship with Miss Voss. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. David Reinhardt, Reinhardt Media Group. They wanted to pay him to humiliate himself further, to turn his failure into entertainment. Adrian deleted it. Outside his window, the city moved on without him. Somewhere down there, Mara was probably meeting with executives, making decisions about the company's future, living the life he'd thought was his. And somewhere else, Victor Kane was watching, making sure Adrian stayed in line, ready to deploy whatever threats were necessary to keep him quiet and compliant. Adrian poured himself a drink from the bar cart Lila had insisted on. Expensive whiskey that tasted like ash. He drank it anyway. His reflection in the window looked back at him. A man who'd believed his own lies so completely that he'd never seen the truth standing right beside him. The truth that he'd never been the builder. He'd always been the facade. And now the facade had cracked. And there was nothing underneath but emptiness. 3 days later, Adrian stood in the back of the room at Cross Industries' emergency shareholder meeting, watching his former life continue without him. The conference room on the 42nd floor was packed with people who used to answer to him, people who used to value his opinion, people who now looked through him like he was made of air. He shouldn't have come. The severance agreement explicitly suggested he stay away from company events, but Victor's text that morning had been cryptic enough to override common sense. You should be there today. Trust me on this. Back row. Don't speak. So here he stood, wearing a suit that suddenly felt too expensive for someone without a job, watching strangers in his former conference room prepare for an announcement that Victor had refused to explain. Mara wasn't there yet. Her empty chair at the head of the table drew everyone's attention like a missing tooth. The board members whispered among themselves, checking phones, glancing at the door. James Morrison looked particularly nervous, his knee bouncing under the table in a tell Adrian had noticed during tense client meetings. Does anyone know what this is about? Sarah Chen from legal asked, her voice carrying despite the attempt at discretion. Full ownership reveal, someone else answered. She's making it official. I heard she's bringing in new C-suite executives, complete overhaul. I heard she's selling to Axis after all. No way. She hates Jonathan Axis. This is something else. Adrian's phone buzzed silently in his pocket. He pulled it out carefully, angling the screen away from the people around him. A text from his mother, the 4th one this week. Please call me. I'm worried sick. I don't care what happened. You're still my son. He'd ignored all of them. What could he possibly say? Hi, Mom. Turns out I was never as successful as I told you. Turns out my wife owned everything, and I was just the pretty face. Turns out I'm a fraud, and everyone knows it now. The door opened. Mara walked in, and the room went silent. She'd changed again. Not dramatically. Mara didn't do dramatic. But everything about her had sharpened somehow. Her navy suit was perfectly tailored, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. Her hair was pulled back in a style that made her cheekbones look sculpted. She wore minimal jewelry, just a watch that Adrian didn't recognize, and small diamond earrings. But it was her bearing that had transformed. She moved like someone who'd stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped shrinking herself to make other people comfortable. Victor followed her in, along with 2 other people Adrian didn't recognize. A younger woman with red hair and an iPad, taking notes on everything. And a man in his 50s with the carefully neutral expression of someone who'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Mara said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Her voice was calm, professional, nothing like the soft tone she'd used when they were married. I know there's been a lot of speculation about the company's direction. I want to address that today, clearly and completely. She pressed a button on the table, and the screens on the walls flickered to life. The Cross Industries logo appeared, then dissolved into a corporate family tree that made Adrian's head spin. For those who don't know the full story, Mara continued, let me clarify the ownership structure of this company. Cross Industries is wholly owned by Vail Holdings, which is wholly owned by Meridian Trust, which is managed by Sterling and Bach on behalf of its primary beneficiary. That would be me. The corporate family tree on the screen simplified, all roads leading to a single name, Mara Elizabeth Vail. I've owned controlling interest in Cross Industries since its inception 10 years ago, she said simply. My initial investment of $75,000 purchased 70% equity. Subsequent capital infusions maintained that ownership percentage. Every board member in this room has known this since they were appointed. Every senior executive has signed documentation acknowledging this structure. Sarah Chen raised her hand tentatively. Mrs. Cross, Ms. Vail, Mara corrected gently. The divorce was finalized yesterday morning. I'm no longer Mrs. Cross. Adrian felt something twist in his chest. Yesterday morning. She'd signed the papers without telling him, without ceremony, probably in between conference calls and strategic planning sessions. Ms. Vail, Sarah corrected. Why reveal this now? Why not let the public continue to believe? Because I'm tired of pretending, Mara interrupted, and because the company is entering a new phase. We're restructuring completely. New leadership team, new strategic direction, new public face. The screen changed, showing organizational charts and financial projections. Adrian recognized some of the strategies. They were plans he'd proposed months ago, refined and improved beyond what he'd imagined. Effective immediately, Mara said. I'm assuming the role of CEO. Victor Kane will serve as Chief Operating Officer. Catherine Reeves, she gestured to the red-haired woman, will be our new Chief Financial Officer. And Marcus Holloway, the older man nodded slightly, will lead our newly formed Strategic Acquisitions Division. James Morrison's face had gone pale. What about the current executive team? There will be changes, Mara said carefully. Some positions will be eliminated, some will be restructured. You'll all receive detailed information by end of day. Those who are retained will receive new contracts reflecting the company's actual ownership. Those who aren't will receive generous severance packages. And Cross? Someone asked from the back of the room. Not Adrian, he'd stayed silent as instructed, but someone brave enough to ask the question everyone was thinking. What happens to Adrian Cross? Mara's expression didn't change. Mr. Cross is no longer associated with the company in any capacity. He's received his severance and signed all necessary agreements. His contributions to Cross Industries during its early years are acknowledged and appreciated, but he has no ongoing role in the organization. She said it so simply, so clinically, like she was discussing a vendor contract, not erasing her husband, ex-husband, from the empire he'd thought was his. What about Axis Global? Another voice asked. The $300 million investment? Withdrawn, Mara said. We don't need Axis's money. We never did. That deal was Mr. Cross's initiative, negotiated without full board approval or proper due diligence. Upon review, we determined it wasn't in the company's best interest. Adrian's hands clenched in his pockets. That deal had taken him 6 months to negotiate. 6 months of dinners and presentations and carefully managed relationships. And Mara had killed it with a phone call. Instead, Mara continued, we'll be partnering with Hartley Ventures. Smaller investment, better terms, no loss of control. The paperwork is being finalized today. The screen changed again, showing details of the Hartley deal. Adrian scanned the numbers quickly. It was better, significantly better. Hartley was investing $150 million for just 15% equity, no board seats, no operational control. He'd been so focused on the prestige of landing Axis Global, the headline, the validation, the proof he could play with the big boys, that he'd missed the predatory terms. Mara had seen it immediately. Now, Mara said, her voice taking on a different quality, I want to address the elephant in the room. Some of you are wondering why I stayed silent for 10 years. Why I let Adrian take credit for work I did. why I played the supportive wife instead of claiming my rightful role. The room was absolutely silent. Even the people pretending to take notes had stopped moving. The answer is complicated, Mara admitted. Part of it was love. I genuinely loved my husband, and I wanted him to succeed. Part of it was strategy. Adrian was good at certain things I wasn't. He could charm clients, inspire teams, sell a vision. Those are valuable skills. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was harder. But part of it was also a test. I wanted to see how far he'd go, how much credit he'd take, whether he'd ever acknowledge my contributions voluntarily without being forced to. Adrian felt every pair of eyes in the room trying not to look at him. He failed that test, Mara said quietly. Not immediately, not even quickly, but eventually, consistently, and completely. So I stopped testing and started planning. Victor leaned forward slightly. Ms. Vale has been preparing for this transition for 18 months. Every decision, every document, every strategic move has been designed to ensure a smooth handoff of public leadership. We're not scrambling, we're executing a plan. A plan that included destroying Adrian's reputation? Someone asked, and Adrian couldn't tell if the tone was judgmental or admiring. A plan that included revealing the truth, Mara corrected. Adrian destroyed his own reputation by lying about his contributions. I just provided evidence of the lie. The red-haired woman, Catherine, spoke up for the first time. We have comprehensive documentation of every strategic decision made at Cross Industries over the past decade. Financial analysis shows that 73% of the company's most profitable initiatives originated with Ms. Vale. Another 18% were collaborative efforts. Only 9% came exclusively from Mr. Cross. 9%. Adrian had built his entire reputation on 9% original work. The screen changed again, and this time it showed something that made Adrian's stomach drop. A side-by-side comparison. On the left, Mara's original strategy documents, complete with dates and file metadata. On the right, Adrian's presentations to clients and investors, sometimes delivered weeks later with minor modifications. We're not sharing this to be cruel, Mara said, though Adrian thought that was debatable. We're sharing it because the company's future depends on transparency and accuracy. We can't build something sustainable on a foundation of false attribution. James Morrison cleared his throat. Ms. Vale, what about the press? There's been significant coverage of the situation. How do we handle the narrative? Well, we tell the truth, Mara said simply. I'm holding a press conference tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll explain the ownership structure, announce the leadership changes, and answer questions. Veronica Chen from Metropolitan will moderate. It's time for the real story to be told. And if people don't believe it, Sarah asked, if they think this is just bitter divorce revenge, then they're welcome to review the documentation, Victor said. We have 10 years of evidence, bank records, email trails, dated strategy documents, witness testimony from current and former employees. Anyone who wants to verify Ms. Vale's claims is welcome to try. Adrian's phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from an unknown number. Watching the meeting? Enjoying the show? This is just the beginning. He looked around the room carefully, trying to spot a camera. Victor had to be watching somehow, had to have eyes in this room. But Adrian couldn't see anything obvious. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes. Mara fielded questions with patient precision, never losing her composure, never revealing more than she intended. She was good at this. Better than Adrian had ever been, if he was being honest. When people finally started filing out, whispering among themselves, making plans for the restructuring ahead, Adrian stayed in his corner. He didn't know why. Maybe he wanted to see if Mara would acknowledge him. Maybe he just wanted one more look at the woman he'd never actually known. Mara packed up her materials slowly, talking quietly with Catherine about tomorrow's press conference. Victor said something that made them both laugh. Actual laughter, genuine and warm. Adrian had forgotten Mara could laugh like that. She hadn't laughed like that with him in years. Finally, when the room was nearly empty, Mara looked up and saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other across the space that used to be his conference room, in the building that used to be his company, in the life that used to be his. Then Mara walked over. Victor moved to follow, but she shook her head slightly, and he stayed back, giving them space, giving them privacy. You came, Mara said when she reached him. Victor suggested it. I know, I told him to. Why? Because you needed to see this, needed to understand the scope of what's happening. She looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. You're going to see a lot of coverage over the next few weeks. Stories about us, about the company, about what went wrong. I wanted you to hear the truth directly first. The truth being that I was useless, Adrian said bitterly. The truth being that you were one part of a larger machine, Mara corrected. An important part, but not the only part. Not even the most important part. That's generous of you. I'm not trying to be generous. I'm trying to be accurate. She shifted her folder to her other arm. Adrian, you're talented. You're charismatic. You're good at inspiring people and selling ideas. Those are real skills, but they're not enough to build what we built. You needed infrastructure, capital, strategy, legal protection. You needed someone who understood the fundamentals. You, Adrian said. Me, Mara agreed. And you were happy to let me provide those things as long as you got the credit. The problem was, you started believing you'd done it alone. Started thinking I was just emotional support instead of operational foundation. I didn't mean to... I know, Mara interrupted gently. You never mean to hurt anyone, Adrian. That's part of your charm. You genuinely believe you're a good person making difficult but necessary choices. But intention doesn't erase impact. Adrian wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that it had been more complicated than she was making it sound. But looking at her now, confident, composed, completely in control, he realized there was nothing to say. She'd already heard every excuse he could possibly offer. She'd probably predicted them months ago, maybe even written them down in some strategy document labeled Adrian's Expected Responses to Confrontation. What happens now? He asked instead. Now I run the company I built. You move on with your severance. We both start over in our separate lives. That's it? 10 years of marriage, and we just move on? Mara's expression softened slightly. Adrian, we stopped being partners the moment you started planning to replace me. Maybe even before that. Maybe we were never actually partners at all. Maybe I was always the foundation and you were always the facade, and neither of us wanted to admit it. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Mara said. And there was no heat in it, just a statement of fact. Life is what we make it, and I'm making something new. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I did love you. For a long time, I loved you completely. I just loved the company more. And I loved myself enough not to let you take both. Then she walked away, back to Victor and Catherine and Marcus, back to the team she'd assembled to replace everyone Adrian had trusted. They left together, talking animatedly about tomorrow's press conference, about strategic initiatives, about the future. Adrian stood alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by chairs that used to be his to fill, looking at screens that used to display his vision. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from Diane Chen, his former publicist. I've been contacted by 3 networks interested in your story. 60 Minutes, Dateline, and a Netflix documentary team. They're offering significant money. Should I set up meetings? They wanted to pay him to dissect his failure in front of millions of people, to psychoanalyze his relationship, his choices, his spectacular fall from grace, to turn his humiliation into content. Adrian thought about the apartment he could barely afford, the savings that would last maybe 4 more months, the job market that would shut him out the moment potential employers Googled his name. He thought about Mara, who'd planned her revenge with the patience of someone willing to wait years for the perfect moment. He thought about everything he'd lost and everything he'd never actually had. Then he typed back, set up the meetings, all of them. If he was going down, at least he'd get paid for the fall. The next morning, Adrian watched Mara's press conference from a bar in Brooklyn, nursing a beer at 11 a.m. while the bartender pretended not to recognize him. The television above the bar showed Mara standing at a podium, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. Veronica Chen stood beside her, managing the chaos with practiced ease. One at a time, please. Yes, David from the Journal. Ms. Vale, can you clarify when you took control of Cross Industries? I've had majority ownership since day one, Mara said calmly. I was the primary investor. The company was built with my capital, my connections, and my strategic vision. Adrian Cross was an important collaborator, but he was never the sole founder. Why hide that for 10 years? I didn't hide it. I simply didn't correct people's assumptions. When Adrian presented our work as his own, I let him. When reporters called him a visionary, I didn't object. I was conducting an experiment. An experiment? Another reporter, sounding skeptical. I wanted to see how long someone could succeed based primarily on charisma and storytelling, with minimal actual strategic contribution. The answer? About 7 years. After that, the cracks started showing. Adrian set down his beer too hard. The bartender glanced over but said nothing. Ms. Vale, some people are calling this revenge. How do you respond? I call it correction, Mara said. For 10 years, the narrative around Cross Industries has been inaccurate. I'm correcting that narrative. If people interpret honesty as revenge, that says more about them than it does about me. What about your marriage to Adrian Cross? When did you know it was over? Mara paused, and for the first time, something flickered across her face. I knew my marriage was over when my husband looked at me and saw an obstacle instead of a partner. When he started planning his future as if I wasn't part of it. When he stopped pretending to value my contributions. When was that? About a year ago. Maybe longer. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when love becomes habit, becomes contempt. The reporter shifted, sensing blood in the water. And the affair with Lila Voss? Was confirmation of what I already suspected. Adrian had emotionally left the marriage long before he physically did. How did that make you feel? Mara smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. It made me feel like I needed to protect my assets. Feelings are temporary. Ownership is permanent. Adrian laughed bitterly. The bartender looked over again, this time with obvious recognition and pity. Another beer, the bartender asked. Yeah, might as well. On the screen, Veronica was wrapping up. Last question. Yes, Margaret from the Times? Ms. Vale, what's next for Cross Industries? Expansion, Mara said simply. We're opening offices in London and Singapore. We're launching 3 new service divisions. We're doubling our workforce over the next 18 months. And we're doing it all under honest leadership with transparent ownership. The company's best days are ahead of us. And what about Adrian Cross? What's next for him? Mara's expression was unreadable. That's not my concern anymore. Adrian is talented and resilient. I'm sure he'll land on his feet. But her tone suggested she didn't care whether he did or not. The press conference ended. The television switched to commentary, talking heads analyzing Mara's performance, debating whether her revenge was justified or excessive, speculating about Adrian's next move. Adrian's phone rang. Diane Chen. Did you watch? She asked without preamble. Yeah. Then you know we need to move fast. Your value is highest right now, while you're still news. In 2 weeks, people will move on. We need to capitalize while there's interest. Capitalize on my humiliation. Capitalize on your story, Diane corrected. Look, I know this is hard, but you've got options. 60 Minutes wants to do a sympathetic profile. Dateline wants to focus on the marriage dynamics. Netflix wants a full documentary exploring corporate fraud and relationship betrayal. They're all offering money. Good money. How much? 60 Minutes is offering $50,000 for an exclusive. Dateline is at $75,000. Netflix is talking 6 figures, possibly low 7, depending on access and timeline. Adrian closed his eyes. 6 figures would solve his immediate problems, would give him breathing room to figure out what came next. Set up the meetings, he said quietly. Good. Smart choice. Adrian, listen to me. You can recover from this, but you need to control the narrative. Right now, Mara's story is the only one people are hearing. You need to tell your side. What if my side makes me look worse? Diane was quiet for a moment. Then we frame it as a redemption story. Man realizes his mistakes, takes accountability, rebuilds his life. People love a comeback. I haven't come back yet. Not yet, but you will. And when you do, we'll be ready to sell it. After she hung up, Adrian sat in the bar while the lunch crowd filtered in, while cable news moved on to other stories, while the world continued spinning without him. His phone buzzed with a text from Victor. Saw you're doing interviews. Smart move. Just remember the NDA. Don't discuss the company's internal operations. Don't disparage Ms. Vale. Don't speculate about her personal life. Stick to your feelings and experiences. Stray beyond that, and we'll have problems. V. Even in his fall, Mara was controlling the narrative, controlling what he could say, where he could go, how he could rebuild. Adrian typed back, "Understood." Then, because he couldn't help himself, "Tell Mara she won. Tell her I get it now." Victor's response was almost immediate. "She knows." Adrian paid his tab and walked out into the afternoon sunlight, into a city that suddenly felt too big and too small at the same time. Somewhere uptown, Mara was probably in a strategy meeting, planning the company's expansion, living the life she'd built. And somewhere else, in coffee shops and offices and apartments across Manhattan, people were talking about Adrian Cross, the man who'd had everything, the man who'd lost it all, the man who'd been married to power for 10 years and never realized it wasn't his. His phone rang again. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Mr. Cross?" A woman's voice, professional and clipped. "My name is Rebecca Stone. I'm a literary agent with Morrison & Associates. I'd like to discuss your story." "I'm already talking to TV producers." "I'm talking about a book," Rebecca interrupted. "A memoir. Your perspective on building Cross Industries, on your relationship with Mara Vale, on what happened. Publishers are very interested. We're talking potential 7-figure advance." 7 figures. A number that would solve every financial problem he had. All he had to do was sell the story of his own destruction. "I'm listening," Adrian said. As Rebecca outlined the opportunity, the timeline, the potential publishers, the angle they'd take, Adrian walked through Brooklyn toward the subway. Around him, people rushed to appointments and meetings, living lives that still had forward momentum. He'd been one of them 3 days ago, had been someone important, someone successful, someone who mattered. Now he was just a cautionary tale with a potentially lucrative book deal. But it was something, a handhold in the collapse, a way to make the fall pay. "Send me the details," Adrian told Rebecca. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long," she warned. "Interest in your story has an expiration date. Strike while people still care." After she hung up, Adrian stood at the subway entrance, looking back toward Manhattan's glittering skyline. Somewhere up there, in a tower he used to think was his, Mara was building the future. And down here, in the streets he'd thought he'd left behind, Adrian was trying to figure out how to sell his past. He went down into the subway, into the crowd of people who'd never known his name, who'd never cared about Cross Industries or Mara Vale or the spectacular collapse of a marriage built on lies. Down here, he was nobody. And maybe, Adrian thought as the train arrived, that was exactly what he deserved to be. 2 weeks after the press conference, Adrian sat in the green room at CBS waiting to be called for his 60 Minutes interview. His palms were sweating despite the air conditioning. Diane had coached him for hours on what to say, how to say it, which emotions to display, and which to hide. "Be vulnerable but not weak," she'd instructed. "Admit mistakes but don't grovel. Show growth. People love a redemption arc." The problem was, Adrian wasn't sure he'd grown at all. He was just broke and desperate and willing to monetize his failures for $50,000 and whatever dignity he could salvage. A production assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Cross, we're ready for you." The studio lights were harsh, revealing every flaw. Anderson Cooper sat across from him, professional and polished, looking at Adrian with the neutral expression of someone who'd interviewed everyone from presidents to criminals and found them all equally human. "Thank you for doing this," Anderson said as they mic'd Adrian up. "Thank you for having me. I want to start by asking the obvious question. What happened?" And there it was. The question Adrian had been asking himself every night while he couldn't sleep. Every morning when he woke up in an apartment he could no longer afford. Every time he saw Mara's face on the cover of Forbes or Bloomberg or any of the dozen publications that had decided she was the new face of female entrepreneurship. "I got comfortable," Adrian said, sticking to the script Diane had written. "I started believing the story I was telling everyone else, that I'd built Cross Industries alone, that I was the visionary, that Mara was just supportive background. But she wasn't. No, she was the architect. I was just the salesman." Anderson leaned forward slightly. "When did you realize that?" "Honestly? Not until she showed me the documentation. Not until I saw years of evidence proving that most of our biggest successes came from her ideas, her strategy, her connections." Adrian paused, letting emotion creep into his voice. "I'd rewritten history in my own head, convinced myself I'd done it all. And by the time I realized the truth, it was too late." Your affair with Lila Voss, when did that begin? Adrian had known this question was coming, had rehearsed his answer. About 8 months before I asked Mara for a divorce. I know how that sounds. I know it makes me look like someone who was planning to leave his wife while still benefiting from her business acumen? Yes, Adrian admitted. Exactly like that. Because that's exactly what I was doing. Anderson's expression didn't change, but Adrian could see the calculation happening. This was good television. A powerful man brought low, admitting his sins, asking for forgiveness he might not deserve. Did you love Lila Voss? Adrian thought about Lila's last text, the speed with which she'd abandoned him, the Instagram post he'd seen last week showing her at some gallery opening with the tech CEO worth twice what Adrian used to be. I thought I did, but I think what I really loved was how she made me feel. Young, successful, like I deserved to have everything I wanted. He looked directly at the camera. Turns out wanting something doesn't mean you deserve it. And Mara? Did you love her? That question hit harder than Adrian had expected. Yes, I did. For a long time, I really did. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing her as a partner and started seeing her as, I don't know, a part of the background, something that was just always going to be there. Until she wasn't. Until she wasn't, Adrian agreed. The interview continued for 90 minutes. They talked about the company, the deception, the moment Adrian realized he'd lost everything. Anderson was good. He pushed without being cruel, probed without being exploitative. By the end, Adrian felt wrung out, empty. Last question, Anderson said. If you could say one thing to Mara Vale right now, what would it be? Adrian had prepared an answer for this too. Something about respect and understanding, and acknowledging her contributions. But sitting there, under the lights, with cameras capturing every micro-expression, he found himself saying something different. I'd tell her she was right, about everything, about me not seeing her, about me taking her for granted, about me destroying something good because I was too arrogant to value it. He paused. And I'd tell her I'm sorry, not because I want her back, not because I think sorry fixes anything, just because it's true. Anderson nodded slowly. Thank you, Adrian. That took courage. After they cut, while production assistants swarmed to remove equipment, Adrian's phone buzzed. A text from Diane. Watching the live feed. Perfect. This is exactly what we needed. Then another text from a number he didn't recognize. Interesting performance. Very authentic. Almost believed it myself. V. Adrian's stomach dropped. Victor had been watching, which meant Mara had probably been watching too. He texted back. I didn't violate the NDA. Victor's response was immediate. No, you didn't. You were very careful. Almost like you had good lawyers coaching you. But here's something to consider. Your interview airs next Sunday. 3 days from now, Ms. Vale has an announcement of her own. Should be interesting timing. Adrian tried calling Victor, but the number went straight to voicemail. He tried texting again. What announcement? No response. The next 3 days were torture. Adrian checked every news site obsessively, looking for hints about what Mara might reveal. He called Diane repeatedly, asking if she'd heard anything. He even considered reaching out to James Morrison or one of the other former Cross Industries executives before remembering that none of them would take his call. On Saturday night, less than 12 hours before his interview was set to air, Adrian's phone rang. Unknown number again. Hello? Adrian. It was Mara's voice, and hearing it made his chest constrict in ways he hadn't anticipated. We need to talk. I didn't say anything I wasn't supposed to be. I know. I watched the interview. Victor sent me the footage. She paused. Can you meet me? Tonight? Where? The apartment, our old apartment. I still have keys. Adrian hadn't been back to the apartment they'd shared for most of their marriage. After the split, Mara had moved out first, taken only what was hers, left him with furniture and memories and a lease he couldn't afford to break. He'd avoided going back, staying in the new place he'd gotten with Lila, the place Lila had abandoned within hours of his public collapse. Why there, he asked. Because I want privacy. Because I don't want cameras or witnesses or any record of this conversation. Her voice softened slightly. Please, Adrian, just this once. He should have said no, should have called Diane or his lawyer or someone who could advise him. But Mara had said please, and he couldn't remember the last time she'd asked him for anything. What time? 9. Don't be late. 9. The apartment looked smaller than Adrian remembered. Or maybe he'd just gotten used to bigger spaces, more expensive views, the trappings of success he no longer had access to. Mara was already there, sitting on the couch they'd bought together from some secondhand store in Brooklyn, back when they'd been young and broke, and convinced that love and ambition were enough. "Hi," she said when he walked in. "Hi." She dressed casually, jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked more like the woman he'd married than the CEO who'd dismantled his life on national television. "Want something to drink?" she asked. "Sure." She poured them both whiskey from a bottle Adrian recognized. They'd bought it to celebrate their first year in business, back when Cross Industries was just an idea and a laptop and endless hope. They'd never opened it, deciding to save it for some future success that always seemed just out of reach. "Seemed like the right time," Mara said, handing him a glass. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them feeling wider than it actually was. "Your interview was good," Mara said finally. "Honest. More honest than I expected. You sound surprised." "I am, a little. I thought you'd try to spin it. Make yourself the victim. Blame me for being too secretive or too controlling." "I thought about it," Adrian admitted. "Diane wanted me to, but I'm tired of lying, even lies that make me look better." Mara nodded slowly. "That's growth. Is it? Or is it just exhaustion? Maybe both." She sipped her whiskey. "I wanted to tell you something before tomorrow, before my announcement goes public and you hear it from the news." Adrian's chest tightened. "What announcement?" "I'm getting married," Mara said simply. The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. He knew the divorce was final, knew he had no claim on Mara's life anymore. But hearing it stated so plainly still hurt. "That was fast," he managed. "Not really. I've known him for years, my whole life, actually." She turned the glass in her hands. "His name is Nikolai Volkov. He's Russian originally, been in the States for 20 years. He's in import-export primarily, some real estate, other ventures." Something in her tone made Adrian look at her more carefully. "Import-export, like your grandmother." "Exactly like my grandmother." Mara met his eyes. "My grandmother didn't just run a business, Adrian. She ran an organization, a family. And when she died, she left it to the people who'd been loyal to her. Nikolai was one of them." "You're saying your grandmother was in the mob." "I'm saying my grandmother was a businesswoman who understood that power comes in many forms. Legal, illegal, somewhere in between. She navigated all of it successfully." Adrian set down his glass before he dropped it. "And you? Are you?" "I run a legitimate company," Mara interrupted. "Cross Industries is completely legal. Every transaction, every contract, every dollar is accounted for and taxed appropriately. But I also have other connections, other resources, protection that goes beyond what lawyers and contracts can provide." "Victor," Adrian said, understanding clicking into place. "Victor works for Nikolai. Has for 15 years. When I started Cross Industries, Nikolai offered me protection, resources, insurance against people who might try to take advantage of a woman building something valuable." She smiled slightly. "I took him up on it. So everything that happened, the documentation, the corporate structure, the way you maintain control, that was all me," Mara said firmly. "Nikolai didn't build my company. He just made sure no one could steal it. There's a difference." Adrian's mind was racing. The shareholders' meeting, the press conference, the way everyone fell in line so quickly. "People respond well to clarity," Mara said, "and to knowing there are consequences for disloyalty. Nikolai's reputation provided that clarity. You used mob intimidation to take over the company. I used the ownership structure I'd legally established to claim what was already mine," Mara corrected. "Nikolai's involvement was just insurance, making sure everyone understood that fighting me would be unwise." Adrian laughed, and it sounded slightly hysterical. "So I wasn't just married to a secret CEO. I was married to someone protected by the Russian mob. Technically, Nikolai's organization isn't strictly Russian anymore. It's more international, more diverse." She said it so casually, like she was discussing a company's hiring practices. "But yes, essentially." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow, when I announce my engagement to Nikolai, people are going to start digging. They're going to find connections between him and my grandmother. They're going to speculate about his business interests. And I wanted you to hear the truth from me first. How considerate. Adrian, her voice was sharp. I'm telling you this so you know what you're dealing with. So you understand that the rules have changed. What rules? The rules about what you can say publicly. The rules about how you discuss me or Nikolai or anything connected to us. She leaned forward. Your interview tomorrow is fine. You stuck to your experiences, your feelings, your perspective. That's acceptable. But if you start speculating about my personal life, about Nikolai's business, about anything that could damage us, you'll what? Have Victor threaten me? Have your mob boss fiancé make me disappear? No, Mara said quietly, because you're smarter than that. Because you understand that some battles aren't worth fighting. Because despite everything, I don't actually want to hurt you, Adrian. I just want you to leave us alone. Adrian stood up, pacing to the window. The city spread out below, indifferent and infinite. Does Nikolai know about me? About our marriage? He knew about you before we even met. He's known about every major decision I've made since I was 18 years old. And he's okay with you being married to someone else for 10 years. He understood it was strategic. I needed a public partner who could be the face of the company while I built the infrastructure. You were perfect for that role. She paused. And I did love you, Adrian. That wasn't fake. It just wasn't enough to override my long-term plans. Long-term plans that included marrying a mob boss. Long-term plans that included protecting everything I built. Nikolai offers that protection. Plus, I love him. Have loved him since I was 20 years old. He's patient, loyal, and he actually sees me. Really sees me. Not the potential version of me I could become with the right training. Not the quiet wife who's useful to have around. Just me. The words stung because Adrian knew they were aimed at him. He'd never really seen Mara. He'd seen what he wanted her to be. Supportive, convenient, undemanding. When's the wedding? He asked, because he didn't know what else to say. 6 weeks? Small ceremony, private. The engagement announcement tomorrow is mostly to preempt the tabloids. They've been running pictures of Nikolai and me together, speculating about who he is. How long have you two been together? Publicly? About 2 months? Privately? She smiled. Like I said, since I was 20. We've been careful, discreet. But now that the divorce is final, there's no reason to hide anymore. Adrian turned back to face her. So during our entire marriage, you were faithful, Mara interrupted. Completely faithful. Nikolai and I had an understanding. While I was married to you, while I was building the company, he waited. Supported me from a distance. Made sure I had what I needed without interfering in my personal life. That's incredibly patient for a mob boss. That's love, Mara said simply. Real love. The kind that doesn't demand ownership or control, the kind that waits. Adrian sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Why are you really here, Mara? It's not just to warn me about tomorrow's announcement. She was quiet for a moment, swirling the whiskey in her glass. Because despite everything, I wanted you to hear it from me. Because I know tomorrow's going to be hard for you. Your interview airs, you're finally getting your story out there, and then 6 hours later I announce I'm marrying someone else. It's going to look like I'm trying to upstage you. Are you? Yes and no. The timing is strategic. I won't pretend it's not. But I also wanted to give you a heads up, professional courtesy, or maybe just lingering affection for who we used to be. We were never who I thought we were. No, Mara agreed. We were better and worse, more complicated than either of us wanted to admit. She stood up, setting her glass on the coffee table. I should go. Nikolai's waiting downstairs. He's here? He insisted on accompanying me. He doesn't like me going places alone, especially to meet with ex-husbands who might be angry. She said it with a fondness that made Adrian's chest ache. I convinced him to wait in the car, told him you weren't dangerous. Am I not? No, Adrian, you're not. You're a lot of things, selfish, short-sighted, occasionally cruel without meaning to be. But you're not dangerous, you're just human. She walked to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I meant what I said in the coffee shop. I did love you. Part of me probably always will. You were my first real partner in building something. That matters, even if the partnership didn't last. Mara, Adrian said, and she turned back. Are you happy? With him? She smiled, and it was genuine. Yes, happier than I've been in years. Nikolai knows what I am, what I'm capable of, and he loves me anyway. Maybe because of it. I should have loved you like that. Yes, she said quietly. You should have. But you didn't, and now we're both moving on to people who fit us better. After she left, Adrian sat in the empty apartment for a long time. He could hear the building's familiar sounds. The radiator clanking, the couple upstairs arguing in Spanish, the street noise filtering up from below. His phone buzzed. A text from Diane. Tomorrow's going to be big. Get some sleep. You're going to need it. Another text. This one from his mother. Looking forward to watching tomorrow. So proud of you for being honest. Love you. And then, unexpectedly, one from Victor. Miss Vale asked me to tell you that the NDA remains in effect regarding everything she told you tonight. But she also said to tell you that she hopes you find what you're looking for, whatever that is. Adrian looked around the apartment, at the ghosts of the life he'd tried to build with Mara. The cheap couch they'd been so proud to afford. The bookshelf she'd assembled badly, one corner still listing to the left. The window where they'd watched fireworks on their first 4th of July together, drinking cheap wine and making plans neither of them would keep. He thought he was building an empire. Turned out he'd just been playing house while Mara built the real thing. His phone rang. Unknown number. Adrian almost didn't answer, but at this point, what did he have to lose? Mr. Cross? This is Daniel Reeves from the New York Times. I understand Mara Vale is announcing her engagement tomorrow. I wanted to give you a chance to comment. No comment, Adrian said. Are you sure? This is your opportunity to... I'm sure. No comment. On anything. He hung up. Within 30 seconds, the phone rang again. Different reporter, same question. Adrian turned off his phone entirely. He poured himself another glass of whiskey from the bottle Mara had opened, the bottle they'd saved for success. She'd achieved the success. He'd just been there for the ride. Tomorrow, his interview would air. He'd tell America about his failures and his regrets and his carefully crafted redemption arc. And 6 hours later, Mara would announce her engagement to a man who sounded like he'd stepped out of a crime thriller. The press would have a field day. The contrast would be irresistible. Fallen executive gives tearful interview while ex-wife announces engagement to mysterious international businessman with questionable connections. Adrian would look pathetic. Mara would look powerful. Story of their marriage, really. He slept on the couch that night in the apartment they'd shared, surrounded by memories of a life that now felt like it had belonged to someone else, someone younger, someone stupider. Someone who'd thought charisma and confidence were the same as competence. When he woke up the next morning to his phone buzzing with notifications, he'd turned it back on out of habit, the news was already everywhere. Mara's engagement had leaked early, probably intentionally. Her publicist was good at controlling narratives. The headlines were exactly what Adrian had expected. From CEO to bride, Mara Vale to marry Nikolai Volkov, and Cross Industries owner announces engagement months after high-profile divorce. And, his personal favorite from page 6, while X-Plots come back, Mara Vale levels up with billionaire fiancé. There were photos, too. Mara and Nikolai at some charity gala, looking like they'd been photoshopped for perfection. He was older than Adrian had imagined, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things most people only had nightmares about. But the way he looked at Mara, like she was the only person in a room full of people, made something twist in Adrian's chest. That's how he should have looked at her, should have seen her. His interview aired at 7 p.m. Adrian watched it alone in his apartment, drinking beer and cringing at his own performance. He thought he'd done well in the moment, but watching it back, he could see the calculation. The careful pauses, the rehearsed vulnerability. America loved it anyway. Twitter, or whatever they were calling it now, exploded with reactions. Half the internet thought he was a narcissist getting what he deserved. The other half thought he was a cautionary tale about ambition and regret. A few people, bless them, just thought he seemed sad. At 9 p.m., Mara's official announcement went live. A statement from her publicist, an interview with Vogue, photos from a professional shoot that made her and Nikolai look like they ruled a small country. Nikolai and I have known each other for years, Mara said in the Vogue piece. He's been a friend, a mentor, and a source of support through some of my most challenging times. I'm grateful that we can finally build a life together publicly. No mention of the mob connections. No mention of her grandmother's organization. Just a sanitized story about childhood friends finding love. The comment sections were brutal. People compared Adrian's interview to Mara's announcement, drawing conclusions about who'd won the divorce, as if marriage was a competition with clear winners and losers. Maybe it was, Adrian thought, and maybe he'd lost years before the final buzzer. His phone rang. Diane, have you seen the numbers? She asked, breathless with excitement. What numbers? Your interview is trending, top 3 on Twitter. The CBS website crashed from traffic. We've already had 6 more interview requests, and Netflix just doubled their documentary offer. That's great, Adrian said flatly. Great? Adrian, this is incredible. You're relevant again. People care about your story. They care about my failure. There's a difference. Who cares why they're watching? All that matters is they're watching. We can leverage this into, I need to go, Diane. Wait, don't. He hung up, turned off his phone again, sat in the silence of his apartment while the city buzzed outside his window. Somewhere out there, Mara was celebrating her engagement with a man who'd waited 15 years for her. A man who saw her for exactly who she was, brilliant, ruthless, strategic, and loved her because of it, not despite it. Adrian had loved the idea of Mara, the supportive wife, the helpful partner, the woman who made him look good without demanding too much attention. He'd never loved the real her. He'd never even tried to find out who the real her was. That was the truth his carefully crafted interview had danced around. That was the reality he couldn't admit on national television because it made him look worse than selfish or stupid. It made him look blind. His phone, he'd turned it back on again because apparently he was a glutton for punishment, buzzed with one final text. From Mara. I watched your interview. It was brave. I hope you find peace, Adrian. I really do. M. He stared at the message for a long time before typing back, I hope you're happy. You deserve it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, thank you, so do you. But they both knew that was a lie. Adrian didn't deserve happiness. He deserved exactly what he got. The consequences of his own choices, the wreckage of his own making. Outside his window, the city glittered with possibility and promise, full of people chasing dreams and building empires, and making all the same mistakes Adrian had made. He was just one more cautionary tale in a city full of them. Just one more person who'd had everything and lost it because he'd been too arrogant to see what he had until it was gone. The only difference was his failure had been televised. His humiliation had been public. His fall had been spectacular. And somewhere in Manhattan, in a penthouse he'd never see, Mara Vale was toasting her future with a man who'd actually earned her loyalty, who'd waited patiently while she dismantled her past, who'd stood in the shadows while she took center stage. Adrian raised his beer in a solitary toast to the woman he'd never deserved and the empire he'd never actually built. Then he drank alone in the dark, which seemed appropriate somehow. The king was dead. Long live the queen and her very dangerous husband. 6 months after the engagement announcement, Adrian Cross stood in line at a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that would have horrified his former stylist. The barista didn't recognize him. Nobody did, this far from New York, this far from the wreckage of his old life. Medium coffee, black, he told her. Name? James, he lied, because even now, even here, he couldn't quite shake the paranoia that someone would connect the dots. His phone buzzed while he waited. An email from Rebecca Stone, the literary agent who'd convinced him that a book was his path to redemption. The manuscript was due in 2 weeks. Adrian had written maybe 40 pages, all of them terrible, all of them trying too hard to make his failure sound noble instead of just sad. The truth was, nobody wanted to read a book about a man who'd screwed up his own life through garden-variety arrogance. They wanted drama. They wanted villains. They wanted Mara to be the calculating witch who'd destroyed an innocent man, or they wanted Adrian to be the abusive husband who'd gotten what he deserved. But real life was messier than that. Real life was just 2 people who'd wanted different things and been too proud or too scared or too self-involved to admit it until everything fell apart. His coffee came up. He took it to a corner table, pulled out his laptop, and stared at the blank page that was supposed to become Chapter 4, The Affair. Diane had been very clear about this chapter. People want details, she'd said during their last call. What attracted you to Lila? When did you first kiss? Where did you meet? Make it vivid. But every time Adrian tried to write it, all he could think about was Mara sitting at home while he was in hotel rooms with Lila, believing his lies about client meetings and late nights at the office. Mara making dinner for a husband who was already planning to leave her. Mara building an empire while he was busy tearing down their marriage. He closed the laptop. Couldn't do it today. His phone buzzed again. This time, a text from a Portland number he didn't recognize. Adrian Cross? This is Michael Chen. I run a marketing consultancy here in town. Heard you relocated. Would love to talk about potential opportunities. Coffee sometime? Adrian stared at the message for a long time. Someone was offering him work. Actual legitimate work, not a humiliating interview or a tell-all book deal. Just consulting. Using the skills he actually had. He typed back, "How did you get this number?" The response came quickly. "Victor Kane gave it to me. Said you might be looking for something low-key. Said you're good at what you do when you're not sabotaging yourself." Victor. Of course. Even 1,000 miles from New York, Mara's influence followed him. Or maybe this was just Victor's version of kindness, making sure Adrian didn't completely self-destruct. Adrian typed, "Coffee sounds good." When? They met the next day at a different coffee shop, this one overlooking the Willamette River. Michael Chen was younger than Adrian had expected, maybe 30, with the earnest energy of someone who still believed in marketing's ability to change the world. "I appreciate you meeting me," Michael said, shaking Adrian's hand firmly. "I know things have been difficult." That's putting it mildly. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. I know your story. Everyone knows your story. But I also looked at your actual work. The campaigns you ran before everything imploded. The Hartley Wines rebrand. The Morrison Tech launch. The Elevation Fitness campaign. Those were legitimately good." "Thanks," Adrian said, unsure how to respond to genuine praise after months of public mockery. "My company is small, 15 people. We do good work for good clients, but we're not going to make you famous or rich. What we can offer is steady work, decent pay, and a chance to rebuild without cameras following you around." "What's the catch?" Michael smiled. "The catch is you work under someone else's leadership. You don't get to be the visionary. You don't get your name on the door. You're just part of the team, contributing what you're good at without the ego. You're asking if I can handle not being the boss. I'm asking if you've learned anything from the past year." Adrian looked out at the river, at the bridges spanning the water, at the city that didn't know or care who he used to be. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I've learned some things." "Like what?" "Like I'm better at execution than strategy. Like I need structure from someone else because I'm not great at building it myself. Like the parts of my success that were actually mine were the client relationships, the presentations, the ability to sell an idea someone else had developed." He looked back at Michael. "I was a really good number 2. I was just a terrible number 1. Michael nodded slowly. "That's honest. I respect that." "So when do I start?" "Monday, if you're serious." "But Adrian, one more thing. You screw up here, you burn bridges with clients, you pull any of the stuff you pulled in New York, and you're done. I don't care what Victor Kane says. I don't care about your reputation. This is my company, and these are my people. Understood?" Understood. They shook hands again, and Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly, but maybe the foundation for it. A chance to be useful without being in charge. A chance to contribute without needing to control. On Monday, Adrian showed up to an office that was a fraction of the size of Cross Industries' former headquarters. His desk was in a bullpen with 5 other people. His title was Senior Marketing Strategist, which was a fancy way of saying he'd be helping other people implement their ideas. His first week was humbling. The junior staffers were tentative around him, clearly uncomfortable working with someone whose public failure they'd all witnessed. But they were good at their jobs, and they didn't need Adrian to rescue them, or lead them, or inspire them with vision. They just needed him to do his part competently. By the end of the first month, Adrian had settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and right. He came to the office at 9. He worked on client projects without his name attached. He offered suggestions that other people could accept or reject without ego. He left at 6 and went home to an apartment that was small and cheap and exactly what he could afford. He stopped checking social media for mentions of his name, stopped reading articles about Mara and Cross Industries, stopped torturing himself with updates about her wedding to Nikolai Volkov. Mostly stopped, anyway. The wedding happened on a private island in the Caribbean. Adrian only knew because it trended on Twitter for half a day, fueled by one leaked photo of Mara in a dress that probably cost more than his yearly salary, standing next to Nikolai, who looked exactly like what he was: powerful, dangerous, and completely devoted to the woman beside him. The photo disappeared within hours, scrubbed from the internet with the efficiency that suggested Nikolai's organization didn't appreciate unauthorized documentation. But Adrian had seen it, had saved it to his phone before it vanished, and sometimes late at night he looked at it and tried to feel something other than a dull ache. Mara looked happy. Really, genuinely happy, in a way she'd never looked with him. That should have made Adrian bitter, but instead it just made him tired. 3 months into his Portland life, his mother finally tracked down his new number. "Adrian Joseph Cross," she said when he answered, her voice sharp with the particular anger only mothers can achieve. "You changed your number without telling me?" "Hi, Mom." "Don't hi, Mom me. I've been worried sick. You stopped returning my calls. You moved across the country without telling me. I had to hear from Diane Chen that you were in Portland." "I'm sorry," Adrian interrupted. "I just needed space." "Space from your mother?" "Space from everything." He sat down on his couch, the one he'd bought from Craigslist for $200. "How are you?" She was quiet for a moment. "I'm fine. Your sister is fine. We're all fine. The question is, are you fine?" "I'm managing." "Adrian, tell me the truth." So he did. He told her about the job, about the apartment, about the simple life he was building that looked nothing like the one he'd lost. He told her about writing 40 pages of a book he'd never finish because he couldn't find a narrative that wasn't just, "I screwed up and paid for it." "Good," his mother said when he finished. "Good? Good that you're not finishing that book. Good that you're working a normal job. Good that you're finally living within your means instead of constantly trying to prove something. I thought you'd be disappointed." "Disappointed?" "Baby, I was disappointed when you married that poor girl and then treated her like she was lucky to have you. I was disappointed when you started showing up in magazines talking about your vision like you were Steve Jobs. I was disappointed when you had an affair with a woman young enough to be your daughter. Lila's 28, not exactly. And you're 42, which makes her young enough to be your daughter if you'd started very early. Don't interrupt me." Her voice softened. "What I'm saying is, this version of you, the one who works a regular job and lives in a regular apartment and isn't trying to be anyone except Adrian, this is the version I'm proud of." Adrian felt his throat tighten. "Really? Really? You were never meant to be a CEO, sweetheart. You were meant to be the guy who helps other people succeed. There's no shame in that. Actually, there's dignity in it. More dignity than in pretending to be something you're not." After they hung up, Adrian sat in his quiet apartment and cried for the first time since the Metropolitan Club gala. Not dramatic tears, just a quiet release of everything he'd been holding on to. His mother was right. He'd spent 10 years trying to be someone he wasn't, and it had cost him everything. But maybe there was something valuable in the wreckage. Maybe there was a chance to build something smaller, but more honest. Meanwhile, across the country, Mara Vale stood in the corner office of Cross Industries, now officially rebranded as Vale Strategic, and looked out at Manhattan spread beneath her like a conquered kingdom. The past 6 months had been a calculated symphony of corporate maneuvering. 3 unprofitable divisions sold off to competitors. 2 major acquisitions that expanded their international footprint. A complete restructuring of the executive team that eliminated anyone whose loyalty was questionable. James Morrison had resigned rather than adapt to Mara's leadership. Sarah Chen from legal had tried to organize a small rebellion among the senior staff. Both of them now worked for smaller firms. Their reputations intact, but their influence diminished. The people who remained were the ones who'd always known the truth, that Mara was the architect, that Cross Industries had always been her company, that Adrian had just been the face on the brochure. "The London office is ahead of projections," Catherine Reeves said, walking into Mara's office with her ever-present iPad. "Singapore is ramping up slower than we'd hoped, but still on track. And Marcus closed the Yamato deal yesterday. $30 million in new revenue. Good, Mara said. What about the Hartley partnership? Solidifying nicely. Their investment is already paying dividends. They've been excellent partners, hands-off, supportive, exactly what we needed. Unlike Axis Global, which had tried to acquire two of Vail Strategic's competitors after losing out on the Cross Industries deal. Tried and failed because Victor had made it very clear that businesses partnering with Axis would find their other ventures experiencing unexpected complications. Nikolai's influence had its uses. Speaking of whom, Mara's phone buzzed with a text from her husband. "Dinner tonight? Want to show you something?" She smiled and typed back, "What kind of something?" "The kind that requires champagne and possibly a lawyer." Mara laughed. Nikolai had been hinting about a surprise for weeks, refusing to give details. She texted, "I'll bring Victor. Already invited him. 7 p.m. Don't be late, Mrs. Volkov." The name still felt new. Mara Vail Volkov, though professionally she'd kept just Vail. The press had speculated endlessly about her choice to hyphenate, reading meaning into every decision. In reality, it was simple. Vail was the name she'd built her empire under, and she wasn't giving it up. But Volkov was the name of the man who'd waited 15 years for her, and she wanted to honor that too. Catherine was still going through numbers when Victor appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "Quick update on the Portland situation." Mara glanced at Catherine, who took the hint and excused herself. "What Portland situation?" Mara asked once they were alone. "Adrian Cross, Michael Chen's firm hired him 3 months ago. He's been working there quietly, no drama, no problems. Thought you'd want to know he's stable." Mara had asked Victor to keep occasional tabs on Adrian, not because she cared about his day-to-day life, but because she needed to know if he was planning anything that could damage her, a revenge plot, a lawsuit, a book deal that violated the NDA. "And the book?" she asked. "Abandoned, apparently. His agent is furious, but Adrian returned the advance, said he couldn't write it honestly without violating agreements, and couldn't write it dishonestly without hating himself more than he already does." "That's surprisingly mature." "People change," Victor said. "Sometimes, usually not, but sometimes." "Should I be worried about Adrian?" Victor shook his head. "No, he's neutered. Working a job that pays maybe $80,000 a year, living in a studio apartment, dating a kindergarten teacher he met at a farmer's market. He's living the life he should have been living all along." Mara absorbed this information without emotion. Adrian dating someone meant nothing to her now. He was her past, already receding into the kind of memory that only surfaced occasionally, usually when she signed documents that still had Cross Industries in the archive headers. "And Lila Voss?" Mara asked, because she was thorough about loose ends. "Engaged to that tech CEO, Tyler Morrison. The one who sold his company for $2 billion last year. She's doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Leveraged the Cross Industries scandal into a whole redemption narrative about how she was deceived too. Of course she did. People like Lila always land on their feet. People like Adrian." Victor paused. "People like Adrian usually don't. The fact that he has is worth noting." After Victor left, Mara stood at her window and thought about the man she'd been married to for 10 years. She didn't hate him. Hadn't hated him even when she was dismantling his life piece by piece. Hate required passion, and what she felt for Adrian now was closer to indifference tinged with faint regret. Regret that he'd never been who she needed him to be. Regret that she'd wasted a decade hoping he'd change. Regret that love hadn't been enough to overcome fundamental incompatibility, but mostly just indifference. Her phone buzzed. Nikolai again. "Bring an appetite. This is going to be memorable." Dinner was at their penthouse in Tribeca, the one Nikolai had bought as a wedding present. The view was spectacular. The Hudson River on one side, the city lights on the other. Nikolai had cooked, which he did surprisingly well for a man whose primary reputation involved intimidating people. "Beef Wellington," he said, pulling it from the oven with the pride of someone who'd spent all afternoon on it. "Your grandmother's recipe. Took me 3 tries to get it right." Victor arrived with champagne, something expensive that Mara couldn't pronounce. They ate at the dining table that sat 12 but currently only held 3, talking about business and politics and a shipment issue in Rotterdam that would require Nikolai's personal attention. After dinner, Nikolai poured more champagne and pulled out a folder. "Remember that building on West 42nd?" he asked Mara. The one you said would be perfect for Vale Strategic's new headquarters? The one that's owned by the Castellano family and definitely not for sale? Was owned by the Castellano family, Nikolai corrected, sliding papers across the table. I convinced them to sell. Mara looked at the purchase agreement, her eyes widening. Nikolai, this is $42 million, yes. Already paid. The building is yours. Wedding present. You already gave me a wedding present. This entire apartment that was for us. This is for you, for your company, for the empire you built. He smiled. Every queen needs a proper castle. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, which was ridiculous. She didn't cry at business deals. But this wasn't just a business deal. This was Nikolai understanding what Vale Strategic meant to her, understanding that her company was more than just revenue and market share. It was proof. Proof that she'd built something real. Proof that she was more than Adrian Cross's quiet wife. Proof that she was exactly who her grandmother had raised her to be. How did you convince the Castellanos? Victor asked, examining the papers. I reminded them that we've had a very profitable partnership over the years, and that profitable partnerships should be maintained through occasional acts of generosity. Nikolai's smile widened. Also, I may have mentioned that I heard their son was having some difficulties with a federal investigation, and that difficulties like that sometimes resolve themselves when the right people are feeling cooperative. You blackmailed them, Mara said. I created a mutually beneficial situation, Nikolai corrected. They get their son's legal problems quietly handled. I get to give my wife the building she wanted. Everyone wins. Victor laughed. Except maybe justice. Justice is a construct created by people with power to control people without it, Nikolai said, refilling their glasses. We have power. We make our own justice. They toasted to the new building, to Vale Strategic's future, to the empire that kept growing. Later, after Victor left and the city quieted to its late-night hum, Mara stood on the balcony with Nikolai, looking out at the lights. Are you happy? Nikolai asked, his arm around her waist. Yes, Mara said, and meant it completely. Are you? I've waited 15 years for you, watched you build an empire, watched you marry someone else, watched you be underestimated and overlooked and taken for granted, and now you're here, you're mine, and everyone knows exactly who you are. He kissed her temple. I'm not just happy, I'm victorious. We haven't won everything yet, Mara said. Vale Strategic is still smaller than I want it to be. We're not in the top 5 consulting firms. We're not... We will be, Nikolai interrupted, because you're brilliant and ruthless, and you don't stop until you get what you want. It's why I fell in love with you when you were 20 years old, standing in your grandmother's office, arguing about import tariffs like you were negotiating a peace treaty. Mara remembered that day. She'd been so young, so determined to prove herself to her grandmother's associates. Nikolai had been one of them, already established, already feared. He'd watched her argue circles around men twice her age, and afterward he'd told her grandmother, "That one's going to rule the world someday." Her grandmother had laughed and said, "I know. That's why I'm training her." Now, 14 years later, Mara was doing exactly that. Ruling her world, anyway. The business world. The world that had overlooked her for so long. The press had mostly moved on from the Adrian Cross scandal. Now they wrote about Mara Vale Volkov, CEO of Vale Strategic, wife of Nikolai Volkov, power couple reshaping the landscape of corporate consulting. They wrote profiles about her business acumen, her strategic vision, her rise from quiet wife to industry leader. Some articles mentioned Adrian, but only as a footnote. The man who'd thought he was building an empire while his wife built the real thing. The cautionary tale about ego and blindness and taking people for granted. A year after the Metropolitan Club Gala, Veronica Chen from Metropolitan Magazine called Mara directly. I want to do a profile, Veronica said. Not about the scandal, not about Adrian, just about you. About how you built Vale Strategic, about being underestimated and how you use that to your advantage. Why now? Mara asked. Because you're about to break into the top 5 consulting firms, and I want the story before everyone else does. Plus, I think there's something here about women who build empires quietly while everyone's paying attention to louder, flashier men. The interview happened in Mara's new office in the building Nikolai had bought her. The renovation wasn't complete yet. Wouldn't be for another 6 months. But Mara's corner office was finished, and it was spectacular. Veronica looked around appreciatively. This is quite an upgrade from Cross Industries. Cross Industries was Adrian's vision, Mara said. Modern, flashy, all glass and chrome. This is mine. Classic, solid, built to last. They talked for 2 hours. About Mara's grandmother, who'd immigrated from Russia with nothing and built a business empire that straddled legal and illegal with equal success. About meeting Nikolai when she was barely out of college. About the patient courtship that had lasted over a decade while she built her public life. About marrying Adrian because she needed a face for her company. Someone charming and presentable who could sell ideas while she developed them. Did you ever love him? Veronica asked. Yes, Mara said honestly. For a while, I really did. I thought we could build something together, that he'd eventually see me as an equal partner, but he never did, and love without respect doesn't survive. Do you regret how it ended? I regret that it had to end publicly. I regret that Adrian was humiliated, but I don't regret protecting what I built, and I don't regret refusing to fade away quietly just to make his exit easier. Some people think you are too harsh. Some people think women should be grateful for whatever scraps of recognition men throw them. Those people can think what they want. Mara smiled. I stopped caring about other people's opinions the day I realized my grandmother had been right all along. The only opinion that matters is your own. The article ran 3 weeks later. The cover showed Mara in her office, looking directly at the camera with an expression that suggested she knew exactly how powerful she was and felt no need to apologize for it. The headline read, "The Quiet Revolution, How Mara Vale Built an Empire While Everyone Was Watching Someone Else." It was perfect. Adrian saw the article in a coffee shop in Portland. The magazine was on the rack by the register, Mara's face staring out at him from glossy paper. He bought a copy and read it over his lunch break, sitting in a park near his office. The article was good, fair. It acknowledged his role in Cross Industries without diminishing Mara's contributions. It presented their marriage as a business partnership that had ultimately failed because of fundamental differences in values and vision. Reading it, Adrian felt something he hadn't expected: relief. The narrative was finally complete. The story had an ending that didn't require his input or his perspective or his carefully crafted redemption arc. Mara had won. Not just the company or the money or the reputation. She'd won the story itself. She'd controlled the narrative from beginning to end. And now she got to define what it all meant. Adrian's phone buzzed. A text from Lauren, the kindergarten teacher he'd been seeing for 2 months. "Still on for dinner tonight?" "I'm making lasagna." He typed back, "Absolutely. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And maybe wine if you're feeling fancy." Adrian smiled. Lauren didn't know who he used to be. Didn't care about Cross Industries or Mara Vale or any of it. She knew him as the marketing guy who helped her school with their fundraising campaign, who showed up when he said he would, who didn't try to be more than he actually was. It was the healthiest relationship he'd ever had. That evening, sitting in Lauren's small apartment eating homemade lasagna and drinking wine that cost $12, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in years. Content. Not happy exactly. Not the manic joy he used to chase through deals and affairs and public validation. Just content. Just okay with being exactly where he was. "You seem different tonight," Lauren said, refilling his wine. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying." Adrian thought about the magazine in his bag, about Mara's face on the cover, about the story that was finally, definitively over. "Yeah," he said, "I think I did." 2 years after the Metropolitan Club Gala, Vail Strategic officially broke into the top 5 global consulting firms. The announcement made the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg simultaneously. Mara did a round of interviews, all carefully controlled, all reinforcing the narrative she'd built. She was the woman who'd been underestimated, the wife who'd been overlooked, the strategic genius who'd built an empire while everyone assumed she was just emotional support. It was a good story, a powerful story. And it was mostly true, which was the best kind of story. At the celebration dinner Nikolai threw at their penthouse, 50 people, caterers, a violinist, Mara found herself on the balcony again, looking out at the city that had finally acknowledged her. Victor joined her, scotch in hand. "Hell of a journey," he said. "It's not over." "It never is. But this is a good milestone." He sipped his drink. "Your grandmother would be proud." "She'd say I took too long," Mara countered. She'd say I wasted 10 years on Adrian when I should have just taken control from the beginning. Maybe. Or maybe she'd say those 10 years taught you patience, taught you how to plan, taught you that revenge is a dish best served cold and with impeccable documentation. Mara laughed. She definitely would have appreciated the documentation. Inside, Nikolai was holding court, telling some story that had people laughing. He caught Mara's eye through the glass and smiled, and she felt that familiar warmth that she'd never felt with Adrian. This was what partnership looked like. Two people who saw each other clearly, respected each other completely, and built something together without one person having to disappear for the other to shine. Ever wonder what happened to him? Victor asked, following her gaze. Adrian? Sometimes, not often. He's still in Portland, still working for Michael Chen, got promoted to director level, engaged to that teacher. Good for him, Mara said, and meant it. He deserves to be happy, just not with me, and not with my company. You really don't hate him. I really don't. Hating him would mean I'm still emotionally invested. I'm not. He's just someone I used to know. Someone who taught me important lessons about protecting what's mine. What lessons? That love isn't enough without respect. That loyalty means nothing if it's not reciprocated. That building something great requires sacrifice, but you get to choose what you sacrifice. And I chose to sacrifice the marriage instead of the company. She looked at Victor. Was that the right choice? Do you think it was? Mara considered this, looking out at the city that was hers now, in ways that had never been Adrian's. Yes, she said finally, I think it was exactly right. Inside, someone called for a toast. Nikolai appeared on the balcony, pulling Mara back to the party. Come, he said. They want to hear from the woman who conquered New York. I didn't conquer it, Mara corrected, following him. I just claimed what was always mine. The toast was given by Marcus Holloway, the head of strategic acquisitions. He raised his glass and spoke about vision and leadership and the future of Vale Strategic. Everyone drank, and then Nikolai insisted Mara say something. She stood in front of people who worked for her, people who respected her, people who knew exactly who she was and valued her anyway. 10 years ago, Mara said, I made an investment in a company. I invested my money, my time, my ideas, my connections. And for 10 years, someone else took credit for what we built together. Some of you know the story. Some of you lived it. All of you know how it ended. People nodded. A few smiled. They'd all been there for the revolution. But tonight isn't about the past. Tonight is about what we're building now. Vale Strategic isn't just my company. It's ours. Everyone in this room has contributed to getting us here. Everyone in this room owns a piece of this success. She raised her glass. So here's to us, to building something that lasts, to protecting what we create, to never apologizing for our power, and to always reading the fine print, laughter and applause. Glasses raised. The party continued late into the night, full of people who believed in what they were building, who trusted the woman leading them, who knew they were part of something significant. Later, after everyone left, after the caterers cleaned up and the violinist packed away her instrument, Mara and Nikolai stood together in their silent penthouse. You did it, Nikolai said quietly. Everything your grandmother said you would do. Everything I knew you could do. You built an untouchable empire. We built it, Mara corrected. I couldn't have done this without you, without your patience, without your support, without your very useful connections that keep competitors nervous and partners honest. My connections are yours. Everything I have is yours. You know this. I do know. And I'm grateful. She turned to face him. Nikolai, did you ever doubt? When I was married to Adrian, when I was building Cross Industries under someone else's name, did you ever doubt I'd come back to you? No, he said simply, because I knew you, really knew you, not the version you showed Adrian or the public or anyone else. I knew you were building something that would outlast any marriage of convenience. And I knew that when you were done, when you'd taken what you needed from that life, you'd come home. And I did. And you did. He kissed her forehead. My patient, brilliant, dangerous wife, the only woman who could bring me to my knees. They stood together looking out at Manhattan, at the empire Mara had built from silence and strategy, and the kind of patient revenge that took years to perfect. Somewhere in Portland, Adrian Cross was probably sleeping peacefully, dreaming small dreams about small victories, building a small life that actually fit him. And here, in New York, Mara Vale Volkov stood at the top of her world, surrounded by power and protection and the love of a man who'd waited 15 years for her. She'd started as an invisible wife. She'd ended as an untouchable queen, and every single step of the journey had been worth it. The story could have ended there, neat and conclusive. But life wasn't that simple, and Mara knew better than to think she'd reached the summit. 5 years after the Metropolitan Club Gala, Vale Strategic was the second largest consulting firm globally. They had offices in 17 countries. Their client list read like a Fortune 500 directory. Mara's personal net worth had crossed into the billions. She was 42 years old, and she ruled an empire that touched every corner of the business world. But power attracted attention, and attention attracted complications. The first complication came from the FBI, investigating connections between Nikolai's import-export business and certain Eastern European organizations with questionable tax practices. The second came from a competitor who'd hired a team of investigative journalists to dig into Vale Strategic's corporate history. Both complications resolved themselves quickly. The FBI investigation stalled after key witnesses became suddenly uncooperative. The journalists found their exposé killed by their publisher, who'd apparently received a very convincing phone call about the dangers of printing unverified allegations. Nikolai's influence at work, protecting what was his. But Mara knew that protection came with a price, that every favor called in, every threat made, every problem solved through intimidation instead of law, added to a debt that would eventually come due. "Are you worried?" Nikolai asked one night, after another close call with regulatory scrutiny. "I'm realistic," Mara said. "We've built something powerful. Power attracts enemies. Enemies will try to tear us down. It's the natural order. And we'll defeat them, like we always do." "Will we? Or will we just keep fighting the same battles over and over until we make a mistake?" Nikolai pulled her close. "Then we don't make mistakes. We stay vigilant. We stay ruthless. We stay ahead of anyone who wants what we have." Mara leaned into him, this man who'd shaped her adult life, who'd given her protection and love and the freedom to build her empire without apology. "I don't regret any of it," she said quietly. "Not Adrian, not the years of silence, not the way it ended, not marrying you, not any of it." "Good," Nikolai said, "because we're just getting started." And they were. Vale Strategic continued to grow. Mara's influence continued to expand. She sat on boards, advised governments, shaped industries. She became the woman her grandmother had raised her to be, powerful, feared, respected. She was no longer anyone's invisible wife. She was no longer content to work in shadows while someone else took the light. She was Mara Vale Volkov. She'd built her throne from patience and strategy and the bones of a marriage that had never deserved her, and no one would ever make her small again. In Portland, Adrian Cross married Lauren in a small ceremony attended by 50 people. No press, no cameras, just friends and family and the quiet joy of building something simple and real. He'd stopped following Mara's career years ago, stopped torturing himself with her success, stopped comparing his small life to her massive one. He was happy, in his way. Not the explosive, validating happiness he'd chased in his cross-industries days, just the steady contentment of knowing who he was, what he could offer, and where he belonged. He taught marketing at Portland State 3 days a week, worked with Michael Chen the other 2, came home to a wife who loved him for who he actually was, not who he pretended to be. It was enough. Sometimes late at night, he thought about the man he'd been, the arrogant CEO who thought charisma was the same as competence, the husband who'd looked at brilliance every day and seen only support staff. He'd been such an idiot. But idiots could learn, idiots could grow, idiots could build smaller, better lives from the rubble of their massive failures. "You're thinking about her again," Lauren said one night, catching the distant look in his eyes. "How do you know?" "Because you get this expression, like you're looking at something very far away that you can't quite reach." "I'm not trying to reach her," Adrian said honestly. "I'm just remembering who I used to be, making sure I never become that person again." "You won't," Lauren said with the confidence of someone who'd never seen his worst self. "You're too aware now, too careful." Maybe she was right. Or maybe Adrian would always be one ego stroke away from sliding back into his old patterns. He'd never know for sure. He could only try, every day, to be better than he'd been. That's what recovery looked like. Not grand redemption, not public forgiveness, just daily effort to be someone worth being. And so the years passed. Mara's empire grew. Adrian's life stayed small and steady. They existed in parallel realities, connected only by the history they'd shared and the lessons they'd learned. Mara learned that power required constant vigilance, that empires needed protection, that being untouchable meant accepting isolation. Adrian learned that happiness came from accepting limitations, that contentment grew from honest work, that love required seeing people clearly instead of projecting fantasies onto them. Different lessons, different paths, different destinies. But both of them, in their own ways, had become exactly who they needed to be. Mara stood on her throne, untouchable and alone in the way all powerful people are alone, building something that would outlast her. Adrian stood in his classroom, teaching students about marketing fundamentals, building nothing that would echo through history, but everything that made daily life meaningful. The queen and the commoner, both of them exactly where they belonged. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Mara's grandmother was smiling, because she'd raised a woman who refused to be erased, who built her empire on her own terms, who proved that patience and planning could defeat charisma and ego. She'd raised a queen, and the queen had claimed her crown. That was the only ending that mattered.